A single gunshot ripped through the desert air as Caleb Mercer's body slammed into the dust, blood spreading across his shirt while 300 spectators screamed in horror. The beast they called Phantom, a black stallion that had nearly killed 30 men, charged forward like hell itself had broken loose, shielding the fallen cowboy with teeth bared and hooves striking. Widow Vivian Crowley grabbed her rifle, knowing this moment would decide everything. Love, revenge, and whether Iron Mesa Ranch would become a graveyard or a legend. But let me take you back to where this nightmare truly began. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The desert didn't forgive mistakes. Vivian Crowley learned that lesson the day she buried her husband in the hard-pan soil of New Mexico territory, watching 6 men struggle to dig through earth that fought them like iron. The wind had blown hot and merciless that afternoon, stripping moisture from everything it touched. 14 months later, she still felt that same wind every morning when she stepped onto the porch of Iron Mesa Ranch, still tasted that same copper-dry bitterness on her tongue. She stood there now, coffee cup cooling in her hand, watching the sun bleed orange across a sky too big for comfort. The ranch spread out before her in all directions, 12,000 acres of scrubland, sage, and stone that had killed weaker souls, 300 head of cattle, 40 horses, 7 permanent hands and another dozen seasonal workers who came and went with the rains, and 1 monster. From the eastern corral, she heard the sound that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat, the sharp crack of hooves against wood, followed by a man's shouted curse. Vivian didn't even turn her head. She knew exactly what was happening. It was the same thing that happened every morning, had been happening for 3 years now. Phantom was destroying another cowboy's courage. "Ma'am?" Old Ben appeared at her elbow, his weathered face creased with worry. He'd been with the ranch since before Vivian married into the Crowley name, back when her husband's father still ran things with an iron fist and a whiskey bottle. Ben had survived both Crowley men, which said something about his survival instincts. "Rawlings just quit," Ben said flatly. "Says he ain't getting paid enough to die before breakfast." "That makes 33. Vivian took a slow sip of cold coffee, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. How much did we lose this time? Torn fence panel. Rawlings got thrown into it head first. He's lucky he didn't break his fool neck. Ben spat tobacco juice over the porch rail. That horse is going to kill somebody eventual, Ms. Crowley. You know it, and I know it. Then we'll bury them next to my husband and get on with business." The words came out harder than she intended, but Vivian didn't soften them. Couldn't afford to. Every rancher from here to Santa Fe was watching Iron Mesa, waiting to see if a woman could actually run an operation this size or if she'd crack and sell to the highest bidder. Most bet on her cracking. A few had already made offers, their lawyers showing up with papers and patronizing smiles. She'd burned every single offer in her fireplace. "Ma'am, I ain't trying to speak out of turn," Ben continued carefully, "but that stallion ain't never gonna be broke. Your husband tried for 2 years before the accident. Every top hand from 3 territories has taken a run at Phantom. The horse is wrong in the head. Mean-born." "My husband was wrong in the head, too." Vivian set her cup down on the porch rail with a sharp click. "Didn't stop him from running this ranch." Ben fell silent. "There were some truths you didn't speak aloud in New Mexico territory, not if you wanted to keep working. But they both knew what kind of man Garrett Crowley had been. The whole town knew. They just pretended otherwise during Sunday services and town meetings, smiling at Vivian like she hadn't worn long sleeves through 2 summers to hide the bruises. "Get Rawlings his severance pay," Vivian said, "and post another notice in town. $100 to any man who can ride Phantom for 30 seconds. $200 if he can do it without getting blood on my corral." "Yes, ma'am." Ben hesitated. "Though I gotta say, you're just throwing money at a problem that ain't got a solution." "Then I'll throw money until I run out or until someone proves you wrong. Either way, I'll know." She dismissed him with a slight nod and turned back toward the house, her boots clicking against worn wood. The ranch house was a sprawling adobe structure that had been added onto over the years without much concern for architecture or beauty. It was functional, solid, and utterly without warmth, exactly like the man who'd built it. Inside, Maria was already working in the kitchen, her hands flying through biscuit dough with practiced efficiency. She'd been the ranch cook for 7 years, and in that time she'd learned to read Vivian's moods better than anyone. "Más café, señora?" "No, I'm angry enough already." Vivian poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher instead, drinking it down in 3 long swallows. Did you hear Rawlings scream? Si. The whole valley heard. Maria shaped another biscuit and laid it carefully on the baking sheet. That horse, he is possessed. Mi abuela would say he carries the soul of someone murdered, someone seeking revenge. Your grandmother would say that about a chicken that pecked her. My grandmother was right about many things. Maria's dark eyes were serious. You cannot break what is already broken, senora. That horse, he is like... She stopped herself, but Vivian knew exactly what she'd been about to say. That horse is like you, broken and angry and refusing to be tamed. I need that stallion working, Vivian said quietly. If Phantom stays wild, he's worthless to me. If he's worthless, I've spent 3 years and thousands of dollars on nothing. And if people think I can't make smart business decisions, they will take your ranch. Maria nodded. I know, senora, but maybe some things are not meant to be fixed. Vivian didn't answer. She walked through the house to her office, the one room that had been entirely hers since Garrett died. She'd stripped out his heavy furniture, his hunting trophies, his collection of whiskey bottles. Now it held a simple desk, filing cabinets organized by season and category, and a large map of the ranch property marked with water sources and fence lines. She sat down at the desk and pulled out the ranch ledger, running her finger down the columns of numbers. The figures were better than last year, but still not good enough. Drought had hit the territory hard. Cattle prices had dropped. And Iron Mesa Ranch, despite its size and resources, was treading water instead of swimming forward. All because of one black stallion that refused to be broken. Phantom had been her husband's obsession, purchased from a ranch in Texas for an obscene amount of money. Garrett had been convinced that breeding rights to a stallion that size and quality would transform Iron Mesa into the premier horse ranch in the territory. He'd been right about the stallion's quality. Phantom had bloodlines that made other ranchers salivate. He'd been wrong about everything else. The horse had been violent from the moment he arrived, nearly killing the transport handlers. Garrett had seen it as a challenge, something to dominate and control. He'd spent hours in that corral with whips and ropes and chains, determined to break Phantom the same way he broke everything else in his life. It hadn't worked. And now Garrett was in the ground, and Vivian was left with a fortune invested in an animal that destroyed men for sport. She closed the ledger and stood, moving to the window. From here, she could see the eastern corral, where Phantom lived in isolated fury. The stallion was pacing the fence line now, his black coat gleaming like wet oil in the morning sun. Even from this distance, Vivian could see the power in every movement, the bunched muscle, the controlled aggression, the absolute refusal to submit. She understood that refusal better than she wanted to admit. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Come. Ben stuck his head in. Ms. Crowley, there's someone here about the notice. Already? I haven't even posted it yet. He says he saw it last time. Been riding for 3 days to get here. Ben's expression was skeptical. Looks half dead, if I'm being honest. But he's got cash for the entry fee and says he wants to try tomorrow morning. Vivian felt something cold settle in her chest. Tomorrow? Most men want at least a few days to watch the horse first. I told him that. He said watching wouldn't change nothing. Ben shrugged. Want me to send him away? She should. Anyone desperate or crazy enough to ride Phantom without even looking at him first was probably both. But desperation and craziness were sometimes the only things that got results. Put him in the guest bunkhouse. Make sure he signs the waiver. And Ben? She met his eyes. Make sure he understands that if Phantom kills him, we bury him in the workers' cemetery and move on. No family compensation, no lawsuits, nothing. Yes, ma'am. After Ben left, Vivian returned to the window. Another fool coming to die on her property. Another name to forget. Another $100 to spend on failure. The pattern was becoming numbingly familiar. She didn't meet the stranger until dinner. The ranch hands ate in shifts in the long dining hall Maria had established in the converted barn. Vivian usually took her meals alone in the house, but tonight, curiosity pulled her across the dusty yard as the sun began its slow descent. Inside, 15 men sat at rough-hewn tables, shoveling down beef stew and fresh biscuits. The conversation was loud and profane, punctuated by laughter and the clink of tin plates. This was their space, their time. Vivian rarely intruded, but when she stepped through the door, Silence fell like a curtain. "Evening, ma'am," someone muttered. Chairs scraped as a few men started to stand. "Sit. Eat." Vivian scanned the room. "Where's our new volunteer?" Ben pointed toward the far corner where a man sat alone, his back to the wall. He didn't stand when Vivian approached, didn't even look up from his plate. That got her attention. "You're here for Phantom." It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." His voice was quiet, roughened by dust and distance. Still, he didn't look at her. "You understand the terms?" I read the notice. Reading isn't understanding." Vivian pulled out the chair across from him and sat down without invitation. "That horse has hospitalized 13 men and crippled 2 more. If you're looking for an easy $100, you're about to learn an expensive lesson." Finally, he looked up. The first thing Vivian noticed was his eyes, gray like storm clouds, set deep in a face that had seen too much sun and too little peace. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with dark hair starting to thread silver at the temples. A scar ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline, old and faded. His hands, wrapped around a tin cup of coffee, were calloused and scarred. "I'm not looking for easy money, Mrs. Crowley." He held her gaze without flinching. "I'm looking for honest work and a place to sleep that ain't the ground. If I can ride your horse, you pay me. If I can't, at least I tried." "You'll do more than try. You'll bleed." "I've bled before." Something in the way he said it made Vivian pause. This wasn't bravado or stupidity. This was a man stating a simple fact, the same way someone might mention the weather. "What's your name?" "Caleb Mercer." "Where are you from, Mr. Mercer?" "Originally, Kansas. More recently, nowhere in particular." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." He took a slow drink of coffee, his eyes never leaving hers. "I heard you needed a horse broken. I break horses. Everything else is just talk." Around them, the dining hall had gone completely silent. Every man was watching this exchange, waiting to see if the widow would tolerate this stranger's bluntness. In the social hierarchy of ranch life, drifters occupied the bottom rung. They didn't sit in the presence of the owner. They certainly didn't speak to her like an equal. Vivian should have put him in his place immediately. Instead, she found herself studying him with the same calculation she used when evaluating livestock. He was lean, which was normal for a drifter, but his leanness was hard muscle rather than starvation. His clothes were worn but clean. His hands showed work, not idleness. And those eyes? Those eyes held something she recognized, a bone-deep weariness that no amount of sleep could fix. "You served." Another statement, not a question. His jaw tightened. "Yes, ma'am." "What war?" "The one everybody wants to forget." He set his cup down carefully. "If that's going to be a problem, it's not." Vivian stood abruptly, decision made. "You ride at dawn. If you're drunk, injured, or still asleep when the sun comes up, the offer is withdrawn. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." "And Mr. Mercer?" She paused at the door. "Phantom doesn't care about your military service. He doesn't care if you're brave or skilled or desperate. He'll try to kill you the same way he's tried to kill everyone else. Make peace with that tonight." "I'm already at peace, Mrs. Crowley." The way he said it, so quiet, so final, sent a chill down her spine. She left without responding, stepping out into the cooling desert evening. Behind her, the dining hall erupted into conversation, the men already arguing about how long the stranger would last. Vivian walked toward the eastern corral instead of the house. Phantom was there, a shadow against shadows, his massive form barely visible in the fading light. When he sensed her approach, his head came up, ears pinned flat. Even after 3 years, the stallion showed her nothing but contempt. "Another one tomorrow," she said softly, not expecting an answer. "This one's different, though. Quieter, sadder." Phantom snorted and turned away, dismissing her. And Vivian stayed at the fence for a long time, watching the horse move through darkness like a ghost. Somewhere behind her, she could hear the ranch settling in for the night, men heading to their bunks, Maria closing up the kitchen, the cattle lowing in the distance. And in the guest bunkhouse, Caleb Mercer was probably lying awake, thinking about the morning. She wondered if he was afraid. She wondered if fear even mattered anymore to a man who looked that tired of living. Vivian didn't sleep well. She never did, but tonight was worse than usual. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Garrett standing in the corral with a whip, saw Phantom rearing up with murderous intent, saw the moment when horse and man collided in a fury of violence that ended with her husband on the ground, unconscious. That hadn't been what killed him, though. Garrett had died 2 months later from what the town doctor called complications from a previous injury. A convenient lie that everyone accepted because the truth was too ugly and complicated. The truth involved a card game that went wrong, a fight in an alley, and a gunshot wound that festered while Garrett was too drunk and proud to seek proper help. But the town preferred the simple story. Tragic accident with a wild horse. Poor widow left alone to manage an impossible situation. It was easier that way. Vivian finally gave up on sleep around 4 in the morning. She dressed in the dark, pulling on her riding clothes and boots, pinning her hair back severely. By the time she made it to the kitchen, Maria already had coffee brewing. "You look terrible, Senora." "Thank you, Maria. Your honesty is refreshing as always." Vivian poured herself a cup and drank it black and scalding. "Is anyone else awake?" "See? Your stranger. He is already at the corral." Vivian's head snapped up. "It's not even dawn yet." "I know. I saw him from the window when I came to start breakfast. He is just sitting there on the fence, watching the horse." Maria crossed herself. "Maybe he is loco. Maybe he wants to die. Maybe he's just thorough." But when Vivian walked out to the eastern corral 15 minutes later, she stopped dead at what she saw. Caleb Mercer sat on the top fence rail, perfectly still in the pre-dawn darkness. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was Phantom's behavior. The stallion stood less than 10 feet away from Caleb, his massive head turned toward the stranger, ears forward instead of pinned. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't retreating. He was watching. Vivian had never seen Phantom do that with anyone. She approached slowly, her boots crunching on gravel. Both horse and man turned to look at her, and for a strange moment, she felt like she was interrupting something. "You're up early, Mr. Mercer." "Couldn't sleep," he nodded toward Phantom. "Figured I might as well get acquainted." "Acquainted?" Vivian kept her voice neutral. "You've been sitting here for over an hour, and the horse hasn't tried to kill you yet. That's already more progress than most men make." "He's afraid." Caleb said it simply, like he was commenting on the weather. "Afraid? Phantom isn't afraid of anything. He's mean." "No, ma'am. He's afraid." Caleb turned back to the stallion. Someone hurt him bad. Probably multiple someones, multiple times. He learned that the only way to stay safe was to hurt first, hurt harder, and never let anyone close enough to do damage. The words hung in the air between them. Vivian felt something twist in her chest. "You can't possibly know that from watching him for an hour." "I know because I recognize it." Caleb's voice remained soft, but there was steel underneath. "I've seen it in soldiers, in animals, in myself. Fear and violence look a lot alike from the outside. Most people can't tell the difference." "And you can?" "I've had a lot of practice." Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed. The sky was beginning to lighten, bleeding from black to deep blue. Soon, the whole ranch would be awake, and word would spread that the stranger was attempting the impossible. "You don't have to do this," Vivian said quietly. "I'll pay you $50 just for trying. You can ride out of here today, and no one will think less of you." Caleb finally looked at her again, and in the growing light, his eyes were absolutely clear. "Do you know what it's like to have everyone tell you that you can't fix something broken?" "Yes." "Then you know why I'm not taking your $50. He slid down from the fence with easy grace. "I'm here to ride that horse. And when I do, maybe people will stop telling both of us that we're too damaged to be worth the effort." Before Vivian could respond, he walked away toward the bunkhouse, leaving her standing alone with Phantom. The stallion had gone back to ignoring her, his attention fixed on the direction Caleb had gone. And for the first time since she'd buried her husband, Vivian Crowley felt something other than anger or exhaustion or grief. She felt curious. By the time the sun broke over the horizon, half the ranch had gathered at the eastern corral. Word spread fast in a place where entertainment was scarce. A stranger was going to ride Phantom, a stranger who'd barely looked at the horse before declaring his intention. The betting pool started immediately, not on whether Caleb would succeed, but on how badly he'd be injured. Ben set the odds at 3-1 that Caleb wouldn't last 5 seconds. Vivian stood apart from the crowd, her arms crossed, watching Caleb prepare with methodical precision. He'd borrowed a saddle from the tack room, checked every strap and buckle twice, and now stood at the corral fence with a rope in his hands. "Ready when you are, Mrs. Crowley," he called out. The crowd went quiet. Vivian nodded to Ben, who opened the gate. Phantom immediately charged forward, aiming directly for Caleb with teeth bared and hooves striking. The crowd gasped. 2 men actually stepped backward. Caleb didn't move. At the last possible second, Phantom veered away, circling the corral at a furious gallop. Caleb watched him without expression, the rope held loosely in his right hand. "He's going to get himself killed," someone muttered. 5 seconds, Ben said. "Told you." But 5 seconds passed, then 10, then 30. Caleb still hadn't moved, hadn't tried to rope the horse or corner him or do any of the aggressive things the previous riders had attempted. He just stood there, watching Phantom run himself into a lather. After 5 minutes, the crowd started getting restless. "What's he doing?" "Nothing. He ain't doing nothing. This is a waste of time." Vivian was about to call it off when Caleb finally moved. He coiled his rope, hung it on the fence post, and walked toward the center of the corral. Then he sat down cross-legged in the dirt and pulled something from his pocket. A harmonica. "Is he serious?" someone asked incredulously. Caleb raised the instrument to his lips and began to play. The melody that emerged was unlike anything Vivian had ever heard in the New Mexico desert. It was slow and mournful, each note hanging in the air like smoke. It wasn't a cowboy song or a saloon tune. It was something older, sadder, a lament for something lost. Phantom slowed his gallop to a trot. The crowd went completely silent. Caleb kept playing, his eyes closed, the music pouring out of him like confession. And Phantom, the beast who'd attacked every human who'd come near him for 3 years, began to walk toward the stranger in slow, cautious steps. Vivian stopped breathing. The stallion reached Caleb and stood there, his massive head lowered, ears forward. He was close enough to bite, to strike, to kill. But he didn't. He just listened. When the song ended, Caleb opened his eyes and looked up at Phantom. "Hello, friend," he said quietly. "I know you're scared. I am too." He stood slowly, making no sudden movements, and reached out one hand. Phantom's ears flicked back nervously, but he didn't retreat. Caleb placed his palm against the stallion's neck. The horse didn't explode, didn't attack, didn't move. From the watching crowd came a collective exhale. "Well, I'll be damned," Ben whispered. Vivian felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of her men. Not over a horse and a stranger who'd been on her property for less than 24 hours. But something had just shifted. Something fundamental. Caleb spent another hour in the corral with Phantom, never trying to ride, never pushing. He just existed in the horse's space, letting the stallion grow accustomed to his presence. Occasionally, he'd play another song on the harmonica. Occasionally, he'd speak in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. And Phantom stayed close, drawn to this human in a way he'd never been to anyone. When Caleb finally emerged from the corral, the crowd had dispersed to their regular work, disappointed that there'd been no violence to witness. Only Vivian remained, waiting. "That wasn't what I hired you to do," she said. "I know, ma'am, but it's what needed doing." Caleb wiped sweat from his face with his sleeve. "I'll ride him, just not today." "You can't make progress without pressure. Every trainer knows that. Every trainer you've hired has failed." He said it without malice, just fact. "Maybe it's time to try something different." "And what exactly are you trying?" "Trust." He met her eyes. "Phantom doesn't need to be broken, Mrs. Crowley. He needs to know that not everyone is going to hurt him. Once he understands that, he'll choose to cooperate. But you can't force that choice. You can only create space for it." Vivian wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that he was wasting time, that trust was a luxury neither she nor her ranch could afford. But the image of Phantom standing peacefully beside this stranger was burned into her mind. "How long?" she asked finally. "As long as it takes." "That's not a business answer, Mr. Mercer." "No, ma'am, but it's an honest one." He turned toward the bunkhouse, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think you already know the difference between breaking something and healing it. You're just afraid to admit which one you actually want." He walked away before she could respond, leaving Vivian standing in the dust with the morning sun burning against her back. Around her, Iron Mesa Ranch continued its daily rhythm, cattle being moved, fences being mended, horses being fed. All the normal activities of a working operation, but Vivian couldn't shake the feeling that something irrevocable had just begun. That night, she sat at her desk long after everyone else had gone to sleep, staring at the ranch ledger without really seeing it. Her mind kept returning to the corral, to the music, to the way Phantom had lowered his guard for the first time in 3 years, to the way Caleb had said, "I know you're scared. I am too." Like it was acceptable to be afraid. Like fear was something you acknowledged rather than buried. Vivian had spent her entire marriage burying fear, burying pain, burying every emotion that might give Garrett another weapon to use against her. She'd become an expert at it, so practiced that even now, with him dead and gone, she couldn't remember what it felt like to let her guard down. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come." Maria entered carrying a tray with tea and bread. "You work too late, Senora." "The ranch doesn't run itself. The ranch will still be here in the morning." Maria set the tray down firmly. "But you will not be if you keep forgetting to eat." Vivian picked up the teacup more to appease Maria than from any real desire. "Did you see what happened today? With the horse?" "Everyone saw. People are already telling stories. By tomorrow they will say that Stranger is a witch or a demon." Maria's expression was thoughtful. "But I think he is just a man who understands pain. You can't train a horse with understanding. You need discipline, structure." "Perhaps. But you cannot heal a wound with a whip, no matter how careful you strike." Maria met Vivian's eyes. "That horse, he is not the only one who is afraid to trust again." "I trust you. I trust Ben." "You rely on us. That is different." Maria moved toward the door, then paused. "Your husband, he broke many things in this house, some with his fists, some with his words. But the worst breaks were the ones he made inside you, the places where you stopped believing that gentleness could exist without weakness following. Maria. Good night, Senora. Drink your tea." After she left, Vivian sat in the silence of her office, Maria's words echoing uncomfortably in her head. She wanted to dismiss them as sentimental nonsense, but the problem with truth was that it didn't require belief to remain true. She thought about Caleb sitting in the dirt, playing his harmonica like he had all the time in the world. Thought about the way he'd touched Phantom's neck with such careful gentleness. Thought about how long it had been since anyone had touched her that way. The thought made her angry. She wasn't some broken thing waiting to be fixed. She was the owner of Iron Mesa Ranch, a successful businesswoman managing thousands of acres and dozens of employees. She'd survived a brutal marriage and emerged stronger. She didn't need gentleness or healing or any of the soft, useless emotions that made people weak. She needed results. Tomorrow, she'd tell Caleb Mercer that he had 1 week to make real progress with Phantom, 1 week to stop playing music and start actual training. If he couldn't deliver, she'd find someone else, someone practical who understood that ranching was business, not therapy. The decision made her feel more in control. It also felt like a lie, but Vivian had gotten good at living with those. She didn't see Caleb the next day until late afternoon. He'd been with Phantom since before sunrise, and according to Ben, he hadn't left the corral except to fetch water. The other ranch hands found the whole situation fascinating and disturbing in equal measure. Some thought Caleb was brilliant. Others thought he was insane. A few thought he was both. Vivian forced herself to stay away, to focus on the dozen other issues that required her attention. A dispute over water rights with the neighboring ranch, supply orders that needed approval, a report from the foreman about potential problems with the southern fence line. But as the sun began its descent, she found herself walking toward the eastern corral anyway. What she found made her stop in her tracks. Caleb had Phantom on a lead rope, walking him in slow circles around the perimeter. It wasn't the walking that shocked her. It was the fact that the stallion was doing it willingly, with no signs of the explosive violence that usually accompanied any attempt at handling. "Easy," Caleb murmured, his voice carrying across the space. "Just like that. Nothing to fear here." Phantom's ears swiveled constantly, monitoring everything, but he followed Caleb's guidance with cautious cooperation. Vivian leaned against the fence, watching. After a few minutes, Caleb noticed her but didn't stop his work. He continued the exercise for another 20 minutes before leading Phantom to the water trough and removing the lead rope. "Progress," Vivian said when he finally approached the fence. Some? Caleb wiped dust from his face. He's starting to understand that cooperation brings relief instead of pain. That's the foundation. How long before you can ride him? Mrs. Crowley, I cannot give you a timeline. Healing doesn't work that way. This isn't healing, it's horse training. Is it? He tilted his head slightly, studying her with those unsettling gray eyes. Because from where I'm standing, that horse is carrying 3 years of trauma that needs addressing before he can function properly. You can call it training if it makes you feel better, but we both know what this really is. Vivian felt her jaw tighten. You're very presumptuous for a drifter I hired 2 days ago. Yes, ma'am. I expect I am. No apology in his voice. But presumptuous honesty is better than polite lies, at least in my experience. And what vast experience would that be? The words came out sharper than she intended, loaded with frustration that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the fact that he was right. About Phantom. About her. About all of it. Caleb's expression didn't change. I led men into battle for 4 years, Mrs. Crowley. Watched some of them die. Brought others home so broken they wished they'd died. The military teaches you real fast how to spot the difference between physical wounds and the other kind. He paused. And how both kinds need tending if you want someone to survive. This isn't war. No, ma'am. But pain is pain, regardless of where it comes from. They stood there in the fading light, 2 people separated by experience and circumstance and a fence rail, yet somehow having the same conversation about entirely different things. Finally, Vivian spoke. 1 week, Mr. Mercer. Show me enough progress in 1 week to justify keeping you on payroll. If you can't, we'll try something else. That's fair. He hesitated, then added, Can I ask you something? You're going to anyway. Why does it matter so much? The horse, I mean. You could sell him, trade him, even put him down. Any of those would be cleaner than what you're doing. Vivian looked past him to where Phantom stood drinking, the stallion's dark coat catching the last rays of sunlight. Because everyone in this territory is watching to see if I'll fail. Every banker, every rancher, every man who made an offer on this property. They're all waiting for me to prove that a woman can't handle this kind of pressure. She met Caleb's eyes. If I give up on Phantom, I'm proving them right. I'm saying that when things get difficult, I quit. Or you could be saying that you're smart enough to know when to change strategies. In their eyes, it's the same thing. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, who are you really trying to prove wrong, Mrs. Crowley? Them or yourself? The question hit harder than it should have. Vivian felt something crack in her chest, a hairline fracture in the armor she'd maintained for so long. Good night, Mr. Mercer. She turned and walked away before he could respond, her stride measured and controlled even though she wanted to run. Behind her, she heard him move back toward the corral, probably to spend another hour with Phantom before dark fell completely. That night, Vivian dreamed of music floating across the desert, of black horses and gray eyes and wounds that wouldn't heal. When she woke before dawn, gasping, she couldn't remember if the dreams had been nightmares or something else entirely. The week passed like water through cupped hands, too fast and impossible to hold. Vivian watched from a distance as Caleb worked with Phantom every morning, the routine becoming as predictable as sunrise. He'd arrive at the corral before dawn, sit on the fence rail playing his harmonica until the stallion approached, then spend hours moving through exercises that looked nothing like traditional horse training. Sometimes he'd walk Phantom in circles. Sometimes he'd just stand beside the horse, his hand resting against that midnight black neck, talking in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. The ranch hands had stopped betting on when Caleb would get killed. Now they bet on when he'd actually ride the damn horse. It's been 6 days, Ben said on the morning of the 7th, watching Caleb lead Phantom through another slow exercise. He ain't even tried to mount yet. I noticed. Vivian sipped her coffee, her eyes tracking every movement in the corral. But the horse hasn't tried to kill him either. That's worth something. Worth what exactly? You're paying him wages to play music and whisper sweet nothings. That stallion still ain't earning his keep. Ben was right, and they both knew it. But something stopped Vivian from walking down there and demanding results. Every time she started toward the corral, with her ultimatum prepared, she'd see the way Phantom's ears pricked forward when Caleb appeared, the way the stallion followed him voluntarily instead of fighting every step, the way violence had been replaced by something that looked almost like peace. It reminded her too much of things she didn't want to think about. Give him today, Vivian said finally. If there's no progress by tonight, I'll have the conversation. But even as she said it, she wondered who she was trying to convince. The morning stretched into afternoon. Vivian buried herself in paperwork, reviewing supply orders and correspondence with her lawyer about a water rights dispute that threatened to turn ugly. The neighboring ranch, owned by Wade Turner, a man whose reputation was built on intimidation and strategic violence, had been diverting water from the creek that ran through both properties. It was technically illegal, but Turner had money and connections that made legal technicalities disappear. She was drafting a strongly worded letter when Maria appeared in the doorway. "Senora, you have visitors." "I'm not expecting anyone." "They are not expected, but they are here." Maria's expression suggested this wasn't a social call. "3 men from town. They say they need to speak with you about the stranger." Vivian felt ice settle in her stomach. She set down her pen and stood smoothing her skirt. "Show them to the parlor." The 3 men waiting for her were familiar faces from Sunday services and town meetings. Edgar Pritchard owned the general store. Samuel Davies was a lawyer who'd tried multiple times to convince Vivian to sell the ranch. And Sheriff Tom Dalton, a man who'd been friendly with her late husband and had never quite looked Vivian in the eye since the funeral. "Gentlemen," she didn't offer them seats, "what brings you to Iron Mesa?" Pritchard spoke first, his hands twisting his hat nervously. "Mrs. Crowley, we've been hearing some concerning rumors about the man you've hired." "I've hired several men recently. You'll need to be more specific." "The drifter, Caleb Mercer." Sheriff Dalton's voice carried official weight. "Some folks in town are asking questions about who he is and why he's here." "He's here because I hired him to train a horse. Unless that's suddenly illegal, I'm not sure what concerns you." "It ain't illegal," Davies cut in smoothly. "But you're a woman alone running a substantial operation. People worry about your vulnerability to certain types of men." The condescension in his voice made Vivian's teeth clench. "My vulnerability is none of your concern, and Caleb Mercer has been nothing but professional." "That may be." Dalton shifted uncomfortably. "But the thing is, Mrs. Crowley, we did some checking. Asked around at the towns between here and Kansas. Turns out your Mr. Mercer ain't just some drifter." "Then what is he?" The 3 men exchanged glances. Finally, Dalton pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "This is a military commendation from the war. Captain Caleb Mercer, decorated for extraordinary valor during the Battle of Stones River. Says here he saved 43 men by holding a position against overwhelming odds, then led a nighttime extraction through enemy lines with minimal casualties." Vivian took the paper, scanning the formal language. It was impressive and completely irrelevant. "I fail to see the problem." "The problem," Davies said carefully, "is what happened after the war. Mercer's wife and daughter died in a house fire 3 years ago. He was off working a ranch 40 miles away. By the time he got word and rode home, there was nothing left but ashes." He paused. "Some folks in Kansas say he blamed himself, say he went a little crazy with grief. Started drifting, picking fights, drinking heavy." "That's heartbreaking," Vivian said coldly. "But unless he's committed crimes, it's still none of your business or mine." "There's more." Dalton's expression was grim. 2 years ago, Mercer worked at a ranch outside Dodge City. One of the other hands got drunk and started beating a horse with a chain. Mercer stopped him, put the man in the hospital with a broken jaw and 3 cracked ribs. So he defended an animal from abuse. That speaks well of his character. "Or it speaks to a violent temper," Davies countered. "Mrs. Crowley, we're simply suggesting that you might want to reconsider employing a man with such a troubled history for your own protection." Vivian looked at each of them in turn, seeing the calculation behind their concern. This wasn't about her safety. This was about control, about making sure she understood her place as a woman who needed masculine guidance. "Gentlemen, I appreciate your visit." Her voice could have frozen water. "But I'm perfectly capable of evaluating my own employees. Caleb Mercer has shown nothing but competence and professionalism. Unless you have evidence of actual wrongdoing, not rumors or speculation, I'll thank you to leave my ranch and my business decisions alone." Pritchard looked uncomfortable. Davies looked annoyed, but Dalton's expression held something else, a kind of pity that made Vivian want to throw something. "Ma'am," the sheriff said quietly, "your husband would have wanted us to look out for you." "My husband is dead, and he never looked out for anyone but himself when he was alive." She met Dalton's eyes without flinching. "We both know that, Sheriff, so please don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Finally, the three men filed out, muttering polite farewells that didn't quite hide their disapproval. Vivian watched them ride away, her hands shaking with a rage she couldn't fully name. They'd come to warn her about Caleb, but what they'd really done was remind her of every reason she'd learned to trust no one. She was still standing at the window when she heard boots on the porch. Ben appeared, his expression troubled. "They gone?" "Yes." "Want to tell me what that was about?" Vivian turned to face him. "They seem to think Caleb Mercer is dangerous, that I'm being foolish to employ him." "And what do you think?" "I think people who use concern as a weapon are more dangerous than honest men carrying grief." She moved toward the door. "Where's Caleb now?" "Still with the horse. Been out there all day." Ben hesitated. "Ms. Crowley, I don't hold with gossip, but if there's things about that man you should know, then I'll learn them from him, not from town busybodies." She grabbed her hat from the stand. "I'm going to the corral." The afternoon sun was brutal, turning the air into something thick and suffocating. Vivian walked across the yard feeling sweat gather beneath her collar, her mind churning with questions she hadn't allowed herself to ask before. What did she actually know about Caleb Mercer? Nothing except what she'd observed, his patience with Phantom, his quiet competence, the way he moved like a man carrying weight no one else could see. And now this, a decorated war hero, a grieving father, a man who'd lost everything and kept moving anyway. She found him in the corral, standing beside Phantom with a saddle blanket in his hands. The stallion was allowing him to drape it over his back, ears flicking nervously but without the explosive panic that had accompanied previous attempts. Caleb saw Vivian approach but didn't stop his work. "He's almost ready," he said quietly. "Another day or two, I think. I had visitors from town. They were very interested in your background." His hand stilled for just a moment, then continued smoothing the blanket. "I expect they were. They showed me your military record, told me about your family, about what happened in Dodge City." She paused. "Were you planning to mention any of that?" "No, ma'am." "Why not?" "Because it doesn't change what I can do with this horse." He finally looked at her, his gray eyes steady. "My past is mine to carry. It ain't relevant to your business. It's relevant if you're a violent drunk with a temper problem." Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or anger. "Is that what they said?" "Among other things." Caleb removed the blanket from Phantom's back slowly, giving the horse time to adjust. Then he led the stallion to the water trough and returned to where Vivian stood. "I did break a man's jaw in Dodge City," he said flatly. "He was beating a mare with a logging chain because she spooked at thunder, hit her until she couldn't stand. I asked him to stop. He told me to mind my own business and kept hitting her, so I made it my business." "They said you put him in the hospital." "I did, and I'd do it again." No apology in his voice. "You want to fire me for that? I'll pack my things and be gone by sundown, but I won't apologize for stopping cruelty." Vivian studied him, this man who'd saved 43 soldiers and couldn't save his own family, who'd decorated for valor but probably felt like a coward every day of his life. "I'm not firing you," she said quietly, "but I need to understand who you are. What happened to your wife and daughter is none of your concern." The words came out harsh, final. "Mrs. Crowley, you hired me to work with Phantom. That's what I'm doing. The rest of my life, the parts that are broken and bleeding and won't ever heal, those don't belong to you or anyone else." "People talk, Mr. Mercer. In a territory this small, secrets don't stay buried. Then let them talk." He turned back toward the corral where Phantom waited. "I learned a long time ago that you can't control what people say. You can only control whether you let it change who you are." He walked away before she could respond, leaving Vivian standing in the dust with more questions than answers. That night she couldn't sleep again. She lay in the darkness thinking about fire and grief and the different ways people broke. Thinking about how Caleb had said the parts that are broken and bleeding and won't ever heal, like he was describing a permanent condition rather than a temporary wound. She understood that better than she wanted to admit. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went to her office. Through the window, she could see a faint light in the guest bunkhouse. Caleb was awake too, probably fighting his own demons in the dark. On impulse, Vivian pulled out a bottle of whiskey she kept for occasional medicinal purposes and 2 glasses. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she walked across the yard and knocked on the bunkhouse door. Caleb answered shirtless, his hair disheveled, a book in his hand. Scars marked his chest and shoulder, old wounds from war or other violence. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her. "Mrs. Crowley, is something wrong?" "No, yes, I don't know." She held up the bottle. "I thought you might want company, the kind that doesn't require conversation if you don't want it." He stared at her for a long moment, clearly trying to reconcile the widow who ran Iron Mesa Ranch with the woman standing on his doorstep at midnight holding whiskey. Finally, he stepped aside. "Come in." The bunkhouse was sparse but clean. A single bed, a small table, his saddlebags in the corner. The book he'd been reading was poetry. Whitman, she noticed. Caleb pulled out the only chair for her and sat on the edge of the bed. Vivian poured 2 glasses and handed him one. "To broken things," she said, "to surviving them." He touched his glass to hers and drank. They sat in silence for several minutes, the whiskey burning warm and steady. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the desert. The sound was lonely and wild. "They told you about the fire," Caleb said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Did they tell you it was my fault?" "They said you were working 40 miles away, that you couldn't have known. I knew the chimney needed repair. Sarah mentioned it before I left. I said I'd fix it when I got back." His voice was carefully controlled. "But I needed the money from that job, so I went anyway. And while I was gone, a spark caught. The whole house went up in 20 minutes. Vivian sipped her whiskey. "You couldn't have predicted that. I could have fixed the chimney before I left. I could have stayed. I could have—" He stopped, his jaw working. "There are 1,000 things I could have done differently, and my wife and daughter would still be alive. Or you could have been there and died with them. Some days that seems like it would have been better." The raw honesty of it hit Vivian hard. She'd spent so long hiding her own pain that hearing someone speak theirs so plainly felt almost indecent. After Garrett died, she heard herself say, "I felt relieved, not sad, not grief-stricken, just relieved that it was over, that I wouldn't have to be afraid anymore." She finished her whiskey and poured another. "The whole town came to the funeral and told me how sorry they were, and I stood there thinking about all the times he'd hurt me, all the times people had to have known and said nothing, and I wanted to scream at every single one of them." Caleb was watching her now, really watching. "Did you?" "No, because that would have been inappropriate. Women are supposed to grieve quietly and accept comfort gracefully." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So I played the role. The tragic widow, the brave woman carrying on alone." "And how's that working for you?" "Terribly. But at least I'm in control of my own life now. That's worth the loneliness." They sat with that truth between them, two people who'd survived things that should have destroyed them and weren't sure if survival counted as victory. "The men in town think you're a danger to me," Vivian said. "They came here all concerned for my welfare, warning me about your violent temper and troubled past." "Are you afraid of me?" She considered the question honestly. "No, I'm afraid of what trusting you might mean. But that's different." "How?" "Because fear of trust is about me, not you." She met his eyes. "You've been here a week, and you've shown me nothing but patience and competence. You've made more progress with Phantom than anyone else managed in 3 years. And every night, I see the light on in here and know you're fighting the same insomnia I am." She paused. "That doesn't make you dangerous. That makes you human." Caleb's expression shifted, something breaking open behind his careful control. "Most people don't see it that way. Most people are idiots." He laughed then, a real laugh that transformed his face. For just a moment, Vivian could see the man he'd been before the fire, before the war, before grief carved him down to essential elements. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect? Someone harder, more bitter, the kind of person who'd want Phantom broken just to prove they could break something. Is that why you came here? To save the horse from me?" "No. I came here because I needed work and a place to sleep. But I stayed because I recognized something in that Stallion, the way he attacks before anyone can hurt him, the way he trusts nothing and no one." Caleb leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I've been him, Mrs. Crowley. I know what it's like to be so afraid of pain that you make yourself into a weapon. And now I'm trying to figure out how to be something else. Something that doesn't just destroy or defend. He looked at her. I think Phantom's trying to figure out the same thing. Vivian felt something shift in her chest, like a door she'd kept locked for years had just opened a crack. Tomorrow, she said quietly, when you ride him for the first time, I want to be there. You've been watching from a distance all week. That's different. Tomorrow I want to be close. I want to see it happen. Caleb nodded slowly. All right. But Mrs. Crowley, when I ride him, it won't look like what you're expecting. It won't be some dramatic moment of conquest. It'll just be two damaged things learning to trust each other enough to move forward together. That sounds perfect. She stood to leave, suddenly aware of how inappropriate this entire situation was. Her in his bunkhouse in the middle of the night, sharing whiskey and confessions. If anyone found out, the gossip would be vicious. But when she looked at Caleb, she didn't see judgment or expectation, just understanding. Thank you, she said at the door, for being honest. Thank you for listening. Vivian walked back across the dark yard feeling lighter than she had in months. Above her, stars scattered across the sky in patterns too vast to comprehend. Somewhere in the corrals, Phantom slept. And in the bunkhouse behind her, Caleb Mercer probably returned to his poetry and his insomnia. Two broken people learning to exist in the same space without destroying each other. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next morning arrived with clouds building on the horizon, rare in the desert, but not impossible. The air felt different, charged with potential rain that probably wouldn't come. Vivian dressed carefully, choosing her riding clothes. When she emerged from the house, she found half the ranch already gathered at the eastern corral. Word had spread that today was the day Caleb would finally attempt to ride Phantom. Ben approached, his expression skeptical. You sure about this, ma'am? That horse might be calm now, but mounting is different. Once Mercer's in the saddle, Phantom could revert. Then we'll deal with it. Vivian scanned the crowd. Where is he? Already in the corral. She pushed through the gathered workers to the fence. Inside, Caleb stood beside Phantom with the saddle blanket and pad already in place. The stallion's ears were forward, attentive, but not aggressive. As Vivian watched, Caleb lifted the saddle and slowly, carefully, settled it onto Phantom's back. The horse tensed, his muscles bunched, but he didn't explode. Easy, Caleb murmured, his hand steady on Phantom's neck. Just leather and wood, nothing that'll hurt you. He worked with methodical patience, adjusting the saddle, checking the cinch, giving Phantom time to accept each step. The crowd watched in absolute silence, barely breathing. Finally, Caleb attached the stirrups and stepped back. Phantom stood there, fully saddled, looking confused but not panicked. Well, I'll be damned, someone whispered. Caleb picked up the reins and walked Phantom in a slow circle, letting him feel the weight and movement of the saddle. The stallion's gait was uncertain, his head tossing occasionally, but he followed Caleb's lead. After several circles, Caleb stopped near the fence where Vivian stood. You ready for this? He asked quietly. The question is whether he's ready. We're about to find out. Caleb stood beside Phantom for a long moment, his hand on the stallion's shoulder, speaking too low for anyone to hear. Then he gathered the reins, put his left foot in the stirrup, and in one smooth motion swung into the saddle. The entire crowd held its breath. Phantom stood absolutely still, every muscle rigid with tension. His ears were pinned flat. His head was high. Vivian could see the whites of his eyes. But he didn't buck, didn't rear, didn't attack. Caleb sat quiet in the saddle, his hands light on the reins, giving Phantom time to process this new reality. Seconds stretched into a minute, then 2. Slowly, carefully, Caleb asked Phantom to walk forward. The stallion took one hesitant step, then another. His movements were stiff, uncertain, but he was moving. Under saddle, with a rider, without violence. Someone in the crowd started to clap, but Ben hushed them sharply. This wasn't over yet. Caleb guided Phantom through a slow walk around the corral, talking constantly in that low, soothing voice. The stallion's ears began to relax, rotating forward to listen. His steps became more fluid. After 5 minutes, Caleb asked for a trot. Phantom hesitated, then shifted into a rough, choppy trot that smoothed out after a few strides. The power in his movement was obvious. This was a horse built for speed and strength, finally being allowed to use both. Vivian felt tears prick her eyes and didn't bother hiding them. This was impossible. This shouldn't be happening. But it was. Caleb brought Phantom back to a walk, then to a stop. He dismounted slowly, praising the horse with words and hands. Phantom's head lowered, his eyes soft, accepting the affection like he'd been starved for it. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Caleb led Phantom to the gate, opening it and walking the stallion out into the morning air. Workers scrambled out of his way, still wary despite what they'd just witnessed. He stopped in front of Vivian. He did it. We did it. I saw. Her voice wasn't quite steady. That was remarkable, Mr. Mercer. It was necessary. He ran his hand down Phantom's neck one more time. He's not fixed, Mrs. Crowley. He's still carrying damage. But now he knows that not everything with hands will hurt him. That's the foundation for everything else. Before Vivian could respond, a horse and rider came thundering into the yard, dust rising in their wake. She recognized the rider, Jimmy Parsons, who worked for Wade Turner at the neighboring ranch. The young man pulled up hard, his horse lathered and blowing. Mrs. Crowley, there's been an accident. Vivian's stomach dropped. What kind of accident? Fire, ma'am. Lightning struck one of Turner's barns last night. It's mostly contained now, but 3 men got burned trying to save the horses. He glanced at Caleb. Mr. Turner heard you had a man with military medical training. He's asking if you could send him over to help. Every eye turned to Caleb. His face had gone carefully blank. I'm not a doctor. But you know field medicine, right? How to treat burns and shock. Jimmy looked desperate. Please, mister. Doc Harris is in Santa Fe, won't be back for 2 days. These men are suffering bad. Vivian saw Caleb's hands tighten on Phantom's reins, saw the war behind his eyes, the battle between never wanting to see burn victims again and the inability to refuse help when people were hurting. Go, she said quietly. Take whatever medical supplies we have. I'll send Ben with you. Mrs. Crowley. These men need help. You can provide it. Nothing else matters. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, something complicated passing between them. Then he nodded and handed Phantom's reins to one of the workers. Cool him down proper. Fresh water, easy walking. Don't put him back in the corral yet. Within 15 minutes, Caleb and Ben were riding hard toward Turner's ranch, with saddlebags full of bandages, ointment, and whiskey. Vivian watched them go, a knot of anxiety tight in her chest. She didn't know Wade Turner well, but his reputation was ugly. He ran his ranch through fear and intimidation, and men who worked for him rarely lasted long. The fact that he'd sent for help suggested the injuries were serious. The fact that he'd specifically asked for someone with military medical training suggested he'd been asking questions about Caleb. That thought bothered Vivian more than she wanted to admit. The afternoon dragged. Vivian tried to focus on work, but found herself constantly checking the road for signs of Ben and Caleb's return. The clouds that had been building all morning never delivered rain, just oppressive heat and the smell of distant moisture. It was nearly sunset when they finally rode back into the yard. Ben looked tired but fine. Caleb looked like he'd been to hell and decided not to come back all the way. Vivian met them at the stable. How bad? 2 men with second-degree burns on their hands and arms, Ben reported. One with worse damage to his chest and face. Mercer here cleaned the wounds, applied dressings, gave them something for the pain. Turner was grateful, offered payment, which I refused. Caleb dismounted stiffly. They were burn-saving animals. That's payment enough. How are you? Vivian asked him quietly. I'm fine. He wasn't fine. She could see it in every line of his body, in the way he avoided meeting her eyes. Being around burn victims, smelling that particular combination of charred flesh and fear, it had taken him straight back to whatever he'd found when he rode home 3 years ago. Go rest, she told him. That's an order. Yes, ma'am. He walked toward the bunkhouse like a man twice his age, his shoulders bowed under invisible weight. Ben watched him go, his expression troubled. That man's carrying more grief than any one person should have to bear. I know. Turner asked a lot of questions about him, where he came from, what his history was, why you hired him. Ben turned to Vivian. I didn't like the way he was asking. Felt like he was gathering ammunition for something. What did you tell him? Nothing. Said it wasn't my business to share another man's story. Ben paused. But Turner's got resources, ma'am. If he wants to know about Caleb Mercer, he'll find out. Let him look. There's nothing illegal in Caleb's past. Maybe not, but there's plenty that's painful, and men like Turner, they know how to weaponize pain. Vivian felt cold despite the lingering heat. You think Turner sees Caleb as a threat? I think Turner sees everything as either a threat or a tool. And I ain't sure which category Caleb falls into yet. Ben picked up his horse's reins. Just be careful, ma'am. There's politics happening here that go deeper than horses and ranch work. After he left, Vivian stood in the gathering darkness, thinking about weapons and tools and the ways people used each other. She should stay away from Caleb's bunkhouse tonight, should let him process his demons alone, should maintain the professional distance appropriate between employer and employee. Instead, she found herself walking across the yard again, this time without whiskey as an excuse. The bunkhouse was dark. She almost turned back, but then she heard it, the sound of Caleb's harmonica, playing that same mournful melody he'd used with Phantom. She knocked softly. The music stopped. Come in. He was sitting on the bed in the darkness, the harmonica still in his hands. He didn't look surprised to see her. I'm sorry, Vivian said. About today. About making you go. You didn't make me. I chose. He set the harmonica aside. Those men needed help. I had the skills. It was simple. Nothing about today was simple. No. He was quiet for a moment. The man with the chest burns, he kept asking for his wife. Kept saying he needed to tell her something important. I couldn't make out what. His voice cracked slightly. My wife died calling for me. The neighbors heard her, said she screamed my name until the smoke took her. Vivian crossed the room and sat beside him on the bed, close enough that their shoulders touched. You weren't there. You couldn't have saved her. I know that in my head, but knowing something and believing it are different things. Yes, they are. She thought about all the times people had told her that Garrett's violence wasn't her fault, that she didn't deserve the pain he caused. She'd known they were right, but she'd never quite believed it. They sat in the darkness, two people carrying guilt that didn't belong to them but wouldn't let go anyway. Today, Caleb said finally, when I was in that saddle with Phantom, I felt something I haven't felt in 3 years. What? Hope. Like maybe broken things really could heal if you gave them enough time and patience. He turned to look at her. And then I spent the afternoon with those burned men, and all I could think was that some wounds don't heal. They just scar over and hurt forever. Maybe both things are true. How do you live with that? You wake up every morning and decide which truth you're going to believe that day. Vivian stood, suddenly aware of how inappropriate this all was. I should go. Stay. The word hung in the air between them. Caleb, not for anything improper, just stay. Talk to me. Help me remember what it feels like to be human instead of haunted. His eyes found hers in the darkness. Please. So she stayed. They talked about small things, the weather, the ranch, the way desert stars look different from stars anywhere else. They talked about big things, loss and survival, and the question of whether healing was even possible for people like them. And somewhere around midnight, Vivian fell asleep sitting beside him on the bed, her head dropping to his shoulder. When she woke at dawn, she was lying down, covered with a blanket. Caleb was gone, probably already at the corral with Phantom. She should have felt embarrassed or ashamed. Instead, she felt rested for the first time in months. The thought terrified her more than anything else. Over the next 2 weeks, something shifted in the atmosphere at Iron Mesa Ranch. Caleb worked with Phantom every morning, the sessions growing longer and more complex. The Stallion was riding consistently now, responding to voice commands and leg pressure with a willingness that seemed to surprise him as much as anyone watching. Word spread through the territory like wildfire. The Widow Crowley's impossible horse had finally been broken by some drifter nobody had ever heard of, except Caleb hadn't broken anything. He just convinced Phantom that cooperation didn't mean surrender. The distinction mattered to Vivian more than she wanted to admit. She found herself spending more time near the corral, watching Caleb work. Sometimes she'd bring coffee, and they'd talk during his breaks. Small conversations about nothing important that somehow felt more intimate than the midnight confessions they'd shared. The ranch hands noticed. Maria noticed. Hell, Probably the cattle noticed. Vivian didn't care. For the first time since Garrett died, she felt something other than the constant weight of survival. She felt alive, present. Like maybe the future could be more than just getting through each day without breaking. It scared the hell out of her. On a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after Caleb arrived, Vivian was in her office reviewing supply orders when Ben knocked on the doorframe. "Ma'am, you got another visitor." She looked up, irritated. "If it's more men from town coming to warn me about my employee, tell them I'm not available." "It ain't that. It's Dr. Harrison. Says he needs to speak with you urgent-like." Dr. Martin Harrison was an old man who'd been practicing medicine in the territory since before Vivian was born. He'd treated her for pneumonia when she was 12, set her broken wrist when she was 16, and silently bandaged wounds that Garrett inflicted without ever asking questions that might require uncomfortable answers. She trusted him about as much as she trusted anyone. "Send him in." Harrison entered slowly, his medical bag in one hand and a leather satchel in the other. He looked older than the last time she'd seen him, his face carved with lines that spoke of too many hard conversations. "Martin," she stood, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Business I wish I didn't have to conduct." He sat down heavily, setting both bags on the floor. "How are you, Vivian? Truthfully." "I'm managing. The ranch is doing well. Better than expected." "I heard you hired someone to work with that stallion. Heard he actually succeeded where dozens failed." "Caleb Mercer." "Yes. He's been remarkable." Harrison's expression shifted slightly. "You trust this man?" "I'm learning to. Why?" The old doctor was quiet for a long moment, his gnarled hands resting on his knees. "Because what I'm about to tell you is going to turn your world upside down, and you're going to need someone you can rely on when the dust settles." Vivian felt ice spread through her chest. "What happened?" "Wade Turner came to see me yesterday. Drunk. Sicker than I've ever seen him. Not physically, but in his conscience, if that makes sense." Harrison leaned forward. "He confessed something to me, Vivian. Something the whole town has been hiding for 14 months. "What are you talking about?" "Your husband didn't die from complications of a riding accident." Harrison's voice was gentle but firm. "Garrett was shot, killed in a card game that went bad at Turner's ranch." The words didn't make sense. Vivian heard them, but they seemed to come from very far away, filtered through water or thick glass. "That's not possible. The sheriff said—" "The sheriff lied. We all did." Harrison pulled a folded paper from his satchel. "Turner wrote this last night. A full confession. He was drunk and terrified and convinced he was dying. He wanted someone to know the truth before he went." Vivian took the paper with numb fingers. The handwriting was barely legible, scrawled and desperate. "I killed Garrett Crowley. Not on purpose, but I killed him just the same. He came to my ranch for cards, got drunk, accused me of cheating, started a fight, pulled a knife. I had a pistol on the table, and when he came at me, I shot him. Center mass. He died in my parlor, bleeding out on my wife's good rug. We panicked, me and the 5 men who were there. We all knew Garrett beat his wife. We knew what he was. And we knew if word got out about the shooting, there'd be questions about why he was so angry, what really happened, whether it was really self-defense or murder. So we made a plan. Took him out to the desert, made it look like he fell from his horse. Hit his head on a rock. Everyone knew he'd been trying to break that black stallion. It was believable. We told the widow it was an accident. We told the whole town. And everyone went along with it because nobody wanted to speak ill of the dead, and nobody wanted to admit we'd all watched Garrett Crowley abuse his wife for years and done nothing. I can't carry this anymore. The fire at my ranch was punishment. Those men getting burned was punishment for my cowardice. I'm writing this so someone knows. So she knows. Tell Vivian Crowley I'm sorry. Tell her we should have protected her when he was alive instead of protecting him after he was dead." The paper slipped from Vivian's hands. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room was tilting sideways and Harrison was talking, but his voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Garrett hadn't died in an accident. He'd been shot, murdered. And the whole town, the sheriff, the doctor, every person who'd attended the funeral and offered condolences, they'd all known. They'd all lied. "Vivian." Harrison's hand was on her arm. "Breathe, just breathe." They knew. Her voice came out strangled. All of them. They knew what he did to me and they said nothing, and then they lied about how he died. Yes. Because protecting him was more important than protecting me. Because people are cowards, Vivian. Because it's easier to pretend problems don't exist than to confront them. Harrison's eyes were wet. I'm one of those cowards. Every time you came to me with injuries, I knew. I knew and I treated you and I sent you back to him. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere in a marriage. That you were an adult who could make your own choices. I was trapped. I know, and I'm sorry. That apology doesn't fix anything, but it's all I have. Vivian stood abruptly, the chair scraping back. She walked to the window, her whole body shaking with a rage so profound it threatened to crack her bones. Behind her, Harrison spoke quietly. Turner's confession is legally binding. It implicates him and 5 other men, prominent men in town. If you take this to Sheriff Dalton, there will be consequences. Trials, public scandal. The whole territory will know what happened. Good. It won't be easy, Vivian. These men have power and money. They'll fight back. They'll drag your name through the mud. They'll make you out to be a vengeful woman seeking attention. Let them try. She turned to face him, and whatever he saw in her expression made him flinch. They watched me suffer for years. They knew, and they did nothing. And when Garrett finally died, they protected his reputation instead of telling me the truth. Her hands clenched into fists. I want everyone to know what cowards they are. I want them to face what they did. Harrison nodded slowly. Then I'll stand with you. I'll testify to the injuries I treated, the pattern I observed. It won't make up for my silence, but it's something. Why now? Why did Turner confess? He's convinced the fire was divine retribution, that he's being punished for his sins. Harrison's expression was grim. I think he's just sick with guilt and alcohol, but the reason doesn't matter. What matters is the truth is finally out. After Harrison left, Vivian sat at her desk staring at Turner's confession. The words blurred and refocused. Her husband's death, rewritten. Her grief, what little there had been, revealed as wasted on a lie. She didn't realize she was crying until Maria appeared with a handkerchief. Senora, what happened? Vivian couldn't speak. She just handed Maria the confession and watched the older woman's face transform from concern to horror to fury. Those bastards, Maria whispered. Those cowardly bastards. Everyone knew, Maria. The whole town knew he hurt me. See, we all knew. Maria's voice broke. I saw the bruises. I heard you cry at night, and I said nothing because I was afraid. Afraid he would fire me. Afraid he would hurt me too. Afraid that speaking up would only make things worse for you. You weren't the one with power to stop it. Maybe not, but I should have tried. Maria gripped Vivian's hand. What will you do? I'm going to the sheriff. I'm taking this confession, and I'm making sure everyone knows what really happened. They will hate you for it. They already hate me. They just hide it behind sympathy and church smiles. Vivian stood, tucking the confession into her pocket. At least this way I'll know where I stand. She found Caleb in the corral with Phantom, working through exercises that looked more like dancing than training. The stallion was moving with him, responding to the slightest shift in weight or pressure. It was beautiful and heartbreaking, proof that trust could exist even after violence. Caleb, he looked up immediately, saw her face, and was off Phantom and through the gate in seconds. What's wrong? She told him everything. About Turner's confession, about the town's conspiracy of silence, about 14 months of living with a lie. Caleb listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each sentence. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. What do you need from me? He asked finally. I need you to tell me I'm not crazy for wanting to burn their world down. You're not crazy. You're justified. He stepped closer. But Vivian, if you do this, if you expose these men publicly, there will be consequences. They'll come after you. They'll try to destroy your reputation, your business, everything you've built. I know. And you're still going to do it? Yes. She met his eyes. I spent years being afraid, being silent, accepting pain because speaking up seemed too dangerous. I'm done with that. I'm done protecting men who never protected me. Something fierce and proud flashed across Caleb's face. Then I'm coming with you. You don't have to. I know, but I'm coming anyway. His jaw set. You stood by me when the town tried to warn you off. You trusted me when you had every reason not to. Now it's my turn." They rode into town together that afternoon, Vivian on her mare and Caleb on a borrowed gelding. The confession burned in Vivian's pocket like a living thing, demanding justice. The sheriff's office was on Main Street, a squat adobe building that had seen better days. Vivian dismounted and tied her horse, aware of people watching from storefronts and windows. News traveled fast in a small territory. By now, half the town probably knew she was here. "Good." Sheriff Dalton looked up when she entered, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness when he saw Caleb behind her. "Mrs. Crowley, what can I do for you?" She pulled out the confession and laid it on his desk. "Wade Turner killed my husband. This is his written admission of guilt. I'm here to file formal charges." Dalton's face went pale. He picked up the paper with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the words. "Where did you get this?" "Dr. Harrison brought it to me this morning. Turner gave it to him last night." Vivian, this is complicated." "No, Sheriff. It's actually very simple. A man committed murder and covered it up. You helped him. Now I'm demanding justice." "It was self-defense. Garrett came at him with a knife. Then why lie about it?" Vivian's voice was steel. "If it was truly self-defense, why create an elaborate story about a riding accident? Why involve 5 other men in a cover-up? Why lie to me for 14 months? Dalton had no answer. He set the confession down, his hands trembling. "If this gets out, it'll destroy a lot of people. Good people. Good people don't watch a woman get beaten and do nothing. Good people don't conspire to hide murder." She leaned forward. "You're going to arrest Wade Turner. You're going to investigate everyone involved. And you're going to do it publicly so the whole territory knows what happened." "Vivian, please. My name is Mrs. Crowley, and this isn't a request." Behind her, Caleb's presence was a solid wall of support. She could feel him there, ready to back her up if Dalton tried anything. The sheriff looked between them, seeing the determination in Vivian's eyes and the quiet threat in Caleb's posture. Finally, he nodded. "I'll need to verify this with Dr. Harrison, confirm the confession is genuine." "Do what you need to do, but I want action, Sheriff. Today." She left the confession on his desk and walked out, Caleb at her side. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, people pretending they just happened to be passing by. Edgar Pritchard stepped forward. "Mrs. Crowley, what's this about? What were you doing in the sheriff's office?" "Seeking justice." She looked at the gathered faces, people she'd known for years, people who'd smiled at her in church while knowing what Garrett did to her. "Wade Turner killed my husband, and half this town helped him cover it up. The truth is coming out, whether you like it or not." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone said this was madness. Someone else said Vivian was hysterical with grief. Samuel Davies pushed through the crowd, his lawyer's face smooth with practiced concern. "Mrs. Crowley, you're making serious accusations without evidence. This could be considered slander. I have a signed confession from Wade Turner himself." Her voice carried across the street. "So unless you want to add yourself to the list of men who protected my husband while he beat me, I suggest you step aside." Davy's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Vivian mounted her horse, Caleb swinging up beside her. They rode down Main Street at a walk, letting everyone see them together, the widow who refused to be silent and the stranger who stood with her. By the time they reached Iron Mesa Ranch, Vivian was shaking with adrenaline and delayed shock. She dismounted and had to grab the saddle to keep her knees from buckling. Caleb was there immediately, his hand steadying her elbow. "Easy, you did it. You spoke up." "I feel like I'm going to be sick." "That's normal. You just challenged every power structure in this territory." He led her toward the house. "Come on, let's get you inside." Maria had coffee waiting, along with something stronger. Vivian drank both, feeling the warmth spread through her chest without touching the cold knot of fear and rage tangled in her gut. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait," Caleb said. "The sheriff will investigate, or he won't. Either way, you've put the truth out there. People know. They'll hate me for it. Some will. Others will respect you for having the courage they didn't." He sat across from her. "And the ones who matter will stand with you." "You barely know me. Why are you standing with me?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Because I spent 3 years running from everything that hurt. drifting from place to place, telling myself I was just looking for work, when really I was hiding from my own life. He met her eyes. Then I came here and watched you face down fear every single day. Watched you refuse to surrender even when everything told you to. You reminded me what courage actually looks like. I don't feel courageous. I feel terrified. That's what makes it courage. They sat together as the sun moved across the sky, drinking coffee and not talking much. Outside, the ranch continued its rhythms, cattle lowing, horses moving in corrals, workers going about their tasks. The world hadn't ended just because Vivian had spoken truth, but it felt like it might. That night, Vivian couldn't sleep again. She paced her room, then her office, then finally gave up and walked outside. The desert air was cool, stars scattered overhead like broken glass. She found Caleb at this eastern corral, sitting on the fence rail with Phantom standing nearby. The stallion's dark form was barely visible in the starlight. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Thinking too much." He glanced at her. "You okay?" "No, but I'm glad I did it." She climbed up beside him on the fence. "Caleb, when this gets ugly, and it will, I need you to know you can leave. No one will think less of you." "I'm not leaving. You don't owe me anything." "This isn't about owing. It's about choosing." He turned to face her. "I've spent 3 years choosing the easy path. Choosing to run instead of stay. Choosing isolation over connection because connection meant risk." His hand found hers on the fence rail. "I'm choosing differently now." Vivian looked at their joined hands, rough calluses against rough calluses. Two people who'd survived things that should have destroyed them, sitting in the dark with a horse who'd survived the same. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too." "Of what?" "Of this. Of caring about someone again. Of building something that could burn down." His thumb traced small circles on her knuckles. "But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life running from anything that matters." Vivian turned toward him, seeing his face in starlight. The scar, the gray eyes, the quiet strength of someone who'd been broken and kept going anyway. "If I kiss you right now," she said quietly, "the whole town will use it against us. They'll say I'm a loose woman, that you seduced me, that we planned this together for money or revenge or whatever story makes them feel better about their own guilt." "I know." "And you don't care?" "I care. But I care more about this moment than their opinions." He released her hand and slid down from the fence. "But Vivian, I won't kiss you unless you're sure. Unless you're choosing this for you, not because you're angry or scared or trying to prove something." She climbed down to stand in front of him, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool night air. "I'm choosing this because for the first time in years, I want something that isn't about survival or revenge or proving people wrong." She reached up, her hand resting against his chest where she could feel his heart beating. "I want this because you make me feel human again." He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious that might break. It wasn't desperate or passionate. It was tender, honest, the kind of kiss between two people who'd forgotten what gentleness felt like. When they separated, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to get through this. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." "You sound very certain." "I am. You know why?" He pulled back slightly to meet her eyes. "Because we've both already survived the worst things that could happen to us. Everything else is just noise." Vivian wanted to believe him, wanted to think that speaking truth would be enough, that justice would prevail, that the town would see its own complicity and change. But she'd lived too long in New Mexico territory to be that naive. The storm was coming. She could feel it building like thunder in the distance, like the weight of clouds that promised rain but never delivered. All she could do was stand in its path and refuse to run. 3 days later, Sheriff Dalton arrested Wade Turner. The news exploded through the territory like dynamite. People who'd never cared about ranch politics suddenly had opinions. The men implicated in the cover-up hired lawyers. Their wives organized whisper campaigns. And every single one of them pointed fingers at Vivian. She was vengeful. She was hysterical. She was being manipulated by that drifter she'd taken up with. She was trying to steal Turner's land. She was mentally unstable from years of isolation. She was. The stories multiplied faster than Vivian could track them. What hurt most were the women. The ones who'd sat beside her in church, who'd brought casseroles after Garrett died, who'd smiled and offered sympathy. Now they crossed the street to avoid her. Now they whispered behind hands when she passed. Only a few stood firm. Dr. Harrison testified about the injuries he'd treated. Maria spread the truth through the networks of workers and servants who actually saw what happened behind closed doors. Ben made it clear that anyone who spoke against Vivian on Iron Mesa property would be looking for new employment, and Caleb stayed. He worked with Phantom every morning like nothing had changed. He sat beside Vivian during meetings with lawyers. He stood at her shoulder when townspeople came to Iron Mesa to berate her for ruining reputations. His presence was steady as stone and twice as stubborn. A week after the arrest, Samuel Davies showed up at the ranch with an offer. "Turner is willing to settle," he said, spreading papers across Vivian's desk. "He'll plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter, serve minimal time, and in exchange, you drop all civil claims. You also sign a non-disclosure agreement about the circumstances of your marriage." "Absolutely not." "Mrs. Crowley, be reasonable. A trial will drag this through the mud. Every detail of your private life will become public record. Is that really what you want?" "What I want is justice. What I want is for Wade Turner and every man who helped him to face consequences." Vivian stood. "Take your settlement and leave my property." "You're making a mistake. These are powerful men. They'll destroy you." "They already tried that once. I'm still here." After Davies left, Caleb found her in the stables, furiously mucking out stalls even though it wasn't her job. "Hey." He took the pitchfork from her hands. "Talk to me." "They want me to be quiet, to take money and disappear and let them pretend it never happened." She was shaking. "Just like they wanted me to be quiet about Garrett, just like everyone always wants women to be quiet about the things men do to them. So don't be quiet." "I'm not. I'm screaming the truth from every corner and nobody wants to hear it." She kicked a water bucket, sending it clattering across the floor. "They'd rather believe I'm a liar or a lunatic than admit their precious community leaders are cowards and criminals." Caleb caught her hands, holding them still. "Vivian, look at me." She did, tears blurring her vision. "You're right. Most of them don't want to hear it. Most of them would rather you disappear than force them to confront uncomfortable truths." His grip tightened. "But some people are listening. Some people are changing their minds. And even if they weren't, you'd still be doing the right thing." "It doesn't feel right. It feels like punishment." "Because it is. Speaking truth always punishes the person brave enough to speak first." He pulled her closer. "But you're not alone in this. I'm here. Maria's here. Ben's here. And we're not going anywhere." Vivian leaned into him, letting his strength shore up her crumbling walls. She was so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being angry, tired of carrying weight that shouldn't be hers. But she wasn't stopping. That night, Wade Turner's ranch caught fire again. This time it wasn't lightning. This time it was arson. Accelerant-soaked rags stuffed through windows, flames spreading faster than any natural fire. Turner's main house burned to the ground in less than an hour. He and his wife barely escaped with their lives. The sheriff came to Iron Mesa the next morning. "Where were you last night?" Dalton asked Vivian without preamble. "Here, in my house, sleeping." "Anyone verify that?" "Maria, Ben, several ranch hands." Vivian crossed her arms. "You think I burned Turner's house?" "I think someone with a grudge against Turner did. You're at the top of that list. I'm pursuing justice through legal channels, Sheriff. I don't need to resort to arson." She held his gaze. "But I won't pretend I'm devastated that the man who murdered my husband and lied about it lost his house." "This doesn't help your case, Mrs. Crowley. It makes you look vindictive." "I don't care how I look. I care about the truth." After Dalton left, Caleb found Vivian in her office, staring at nothing. "You didn't do it," he said. Not a question. "No, but someone did." She looked at him. "Someone who thinks they're helping me. Or someone trying to make you look guilty." That thought hadn't occurred to her. Vivian felt cold spread through her chest. "You think Turner's allies set his own house on fire to discredit me?" "I think powerful men don't like being exposed, and they're willing to do a lot to protect themselves." Caleb leaned against the desk. "We need to be careful, Vivian. This isn't just about justice anymore. It's about power, and people will kill to keep it." The word hung in the air between them. Kill. "You think I'm in danger?" "I think you embarrass dangerous men, Yes, you're in danger. His expression was grim. Which is why I'm not leaving you alone, day or night. Caleb, this isn't negotiable. You stood up when everyone else stayed silent. Now I'm standing with you, and anyone who wants to hurt you goes through me first. Vivian wanted to argue, wanted to say she could protect herself, that she didn't need a bodyguard, that this was her fight. But looking at Caleb's face, at the determination there, the quiet fury on her behalf, she realized something. Accepting help wasn't weakness. Letting someone stand beside her wasn't surrender. It was trust, and maybe that was the bravest thing she could do. Okay, she said quietly. Stay. I wasn't planning on going anywhere. The tension in the territory stretched tighter over the following weeks, pulled taut like wire, ready to snap. Wade Turner sat in jail awaiting trial, his lawyers filing motion after motion for dismissal. The men implicated in the cover-up hired a legal team that made Samuel Davies look like an amateur. And through it all, the whisper campaign against Vivian intensified until it became a roar. She was a woman scorned seeking revenge. She was sleeping with that drifter to manipulate him into supporting her lies. She'd probably killed Garrett herself and was now trying to frame innocent men. The stories grew more elaborate and vicious by the day. Vivian stopped going to town entirely. When supplies were needed, Ben or one of the hands made the trip. When lawyers needed meetings, they came to Iron Mesa or communicated by telegram. The ranch became both fortress and prison. But something else was happening too. Something Vivian hadn't expected. Letters started arriving. Not many at first, just a few, slipped under the door or left with Maria by women who wouldn't give their names. Brief notes thanking Vivian for speaking up, for saying what they'd been too afraid to say about their own husbands, their own lives. One letter came from a woman in the next county whose husband had beaten her for 15 years. She wrote that seeing Vivian stand up to the whole territory gave her courage to leave. Another came from a ranch hand's wife who'd lost her sister to a violent husband. She said the silence around these things was worse than the violence itself, and Vivian had finally broken it. The letters weren't enough to counter the hatred, but they were something. Small lights in a darkness that had felt absolute. Caleb read them with her one evening, the two of them sitting in her office with coffee growing cold on the desk. You're changing things, he said quietly. Whether the trial goes your way or not, you've changed the conversation. At what cost? Vivian gestured to the window, beyond which Iron Mesa Ranch sat isolated from the rest of the territory. I've made enemies of everyone with power. When this is over, I'll still be here, still alone. You're not alone. You'll leave eventually. Everyone does. Caleb set down the letter he was holding and turned to face her fully. Vivian, I need you to hear something. I'm not leaving. Not after the trial. Not after Phantom is fully trained. Not unless you tell me to go. Why? This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I decided to stay. He reached across the desk, his scarred hand covering hers. I told you I spent 3 years running. I'm done running. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay at Iron Mesa. Permanently. Vivian's throat tightened. As what? An employee? As whatever you want. An employee, a partner, a man who loves you and wants to build something better than what we both lost. His gray eyes were steady, certain. I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other, but I also know that I wake up every morning grateful to be here. That working with you feels like the first real thing I've done since my family died. That when I think about the future, you're in it. Caleb, you don't have to answer now. I just needed you to know that I'm here, for as long as you'll have me. Vivian looked at him. This man who'd arrived broken and helped her piece together her own shattered parts. Who stood with her when the entire territory turned against her. Who treated a violent horse with patience and her with the same careful gentleness. I want you to stay, she said. Not as an employee, as more. Whatever more means. He smiled then, something rare and genuine that transformed his whole face. More works for me. They were still sitting there, hands joined across the desk, when Ben burst through the door without knocking. Ma'am, we got a problem. Big one. Vivian was on her feet immediately. What happened? Riders coming in fast from the east, at least a dozen of them. Ben's expression was grim. They're carrying torches. The words hit like ice water. Vivian looked at Caleb, saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. Get the hands armed, she said, her voice steady despite the terror racing through her veins. Rifles and position them around the main house. If anyone sets foot on this property with hostile intent, they're trespassing and we're within rights to defend. Yes, ma'am. Ben hesitated. Vivian, if this goes bad, then it goes bad. But I'm not running and I'm not backing down. After Ben left, Caleb checked his pistol with practiced efficiency. You should stay inside. Let me and the hands handle this. This is my ranch. I'm not hiding while other people fight my battles. This isn't about pride. It's about safety. It's about both. Vivian pulled her own rifle from the cabinet, checking the load. And I'm not asking permission. They moved outside together, joining the dozen ranch hands who'd positioned themselves around the property. The sun was setting, turning the desert gold and red. In the distance, Vivian could see the dust cloud from the approaching riders, torches flickering like angry stars. Maria appeared at her elbow, a shotgun in her weathered hands. I sent the younger workers to the back buildings. If they're shooting, they'll be safer there. Maria, you don't have to. See, I do. This is my home too, and I'm tired of men with fire thinking they can scare women into silence. The riders came closer, resolving into individual figures. Vivian recognized some of them, Turner's ranch hands, men from town, a few faces she couldn't place in the fading light. At the front rode Samuel Davies, his expensive suit dusty from the ride. They stopped 50 yards from the house, their torches casting dancing shadows. Davies called out, his voice carrying across the space. Mrs. Crowley, we need to talk. You're on my property without invitation, Vivian shouted back. That's trespassing. State your business or leave. We're here to make you an offer, a final offer. I'm not interested in your offers. You will be in this one. Davies gestured to the men around him. Drop the charges against Wade Turner and the others. Sign the non-disclosure. Take the settlement. In exchange, we'll leave you and your ranch alone. And if I refuse? Then we can't guarantee your safety. Accidents happen, Mrs. Crowley. Fires start, cattle stampede. Good workers find better opportunities elsewhere. He paused. It would be such a shame if Iron Mesa Ranch suffered the same fate as Turner's house. Vivian felt rage burn through her fear. You're threatening me. I'm offering you a choice. Be reasonable and walk away with your property intact, or be stubborn and lose everything. Beside her, Caleb's hand tightened on his rifle. She could feel the tension radiating from him, could sense him calculating angles and distances like the soldier he'd been. Get off my land, Vivian said, her voice cold and clear. Right now, before I have my men shoot you for trespassing. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was not speaking up sooner. Now leave. This is your last warning. For a long moment, nothing happened. The two groups faced each other across the darkening desert, torches burning and weapons ready. Vivian could hear her own heartbeat, could smell the fear sweat on the men around her. Then Davies laughed, an ugly sound. All right, Mrs. Crowley, have it your way. But remember, you chose this. Whatever happens next is on your head. The riders turned and thundered away, their torches disappearing into the gathering night. But they didn't leave the area. Vivian could see them stopping about half a mile out, setting up what looked like a camp. They're not leaving, Ben said quietly. They're making a point, showing us they can sit out there and wait. Let them wait. We're not going anywhere. That night, Iron Mesa Ranch transformed into an armed camp. The hands took shifts on watch, rifles loaded and ready. Vivian barely slept, moving between the house and the guard posts, checking on her people. Caleb stayed close, his presence both comfort and reminder of how dangerous things had become. Around 3 a.m, Vivian found him on the porch, staring out at the distant campfires. You should rest, he said without turning. So should you. I've gone longer without sleep in worse situations. She sat beside him on the porch steps, their shoulders touching. Tell me about the war, about the battle that got you decorated. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Stones River, December 31st through January 2nd, 3 days of fighting in freezing rain and mud. We were supposed to hold a position, just a small rise, strategically worthless except that it overlooked a ford across the river. What happened? Confederate forces pushed hard on the second day. We lost half our men in the first hour. Orders came to retreat, but if we gave up that rise, the whole line would collapse. So I made a choice. His voice was distant, remembering. I told my men we were staying, that we'd hold until reinforcements arrived, or until we were all dead. That sounds terrifying. It was. But sometimes you can't think about fear. You just do what needs doing. He turned to look at her. We held for 14 hours, lost 37 men out of 80, but we held. And when reinforcements finally came, they used our position to push back the Confederate advance. The general said we saved the whole operation. And you felt like a failure because 37 men died under your command. How did you know? Because you measure everything by what you couldn't save, not what you did. Vivian leaned her head against his shoulder. I do the same thing. I look at this ranch and see all the ways I could have left Garrett sooner, all the times I should have spoken up. I forget that I survived, that I'm still here, still fighting. Maybe we need to be better at remembering our victories. Maybe. They sat in silence, watching the night sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. In the corrals, Phantom answered with a soft nicker. Tomorrow, Vivian said quietly, I'm going to give them what they want. Caleb stiffened. What? Not the settlement, not the silence, but I'm going to give them a spectacle. She straightened, energy returning to her voice. I'm going to organize a public demonstration, invite everyone in the territory to Iron Mesa to watch you ride Phantom. Show them that impossible things can change when you approach them with patience instead of violence. Vivian, that's dangerous. Those men out there are looking for an opportunity to hurt you. I know, but hiding isn't working. Running isn't an option. So I'm going to do what I do best. I'm going to be loud and visible and impossible to ignore. She stood, pacing the porch. We'll make it a celebration. Invite the whole territory. Get the newspaper from Santa Fe to cover it. Make it impossible for Turner's lawyers to claim I'm hiding or afraid or manipulating the truth. Or you'll paint a target on your back and invite 300 people to watch them shoot. That's why you'll be there. You and Ben and every person on this ranch who believes in what we're doing. She turned to face him. Caleb, I'm tired of reacting. Tired of letting them control the narrative. It's time to take control back. He studied her face in the starlight, seeing the determination there. Finally, he nodded. All right. But we do this smart. Security everywhere. No one gets close to you without being checked. And at the first sign of trouble, you get to safety. Agreed? Agreed. The next morning, Vivian sent telegrams to every newspaper and dignitary within 200 miles. She posted notices in every town. She sent personal invitations to the men implicated in the cover-up, daring them to come watch her triumph. The demonstration was set for 3 weeks out. That gave Caleb time to prepare Phantom for performing in front of a crowd and gave Vivian time to make Iron Mesa Ranch ready for hundreds of visitors. The men camped outside her property, stayed for 2 more days, then left. But Vivian knew they'd be back, knew they were planning something. She could feel it like electricity before a storm. She spent the weeks preparing obsessively. Security routes were planned and replanned. The demonstration area was cleared and marked. Refreshments were ordered. Everything was organized down to the smallest detail because controlling what she could was the only way to manage the fear of what she couldn't. Caleb worked with Phantom every day, pushing the Stallion to perform more complex movements. The horse was magnificent now, powerful and willing, responding to the slightest cue. He was proof that violence wasn't the only way to achieve cooperation. He was proof that Vivian's whole philosophy was right. The night before the demonstration, Vivian couldn't sleep at all. She paced her room, then her office, then finally ended up in the kitchen where Maria was already starting breakfast preparations at 4 in the morning. You should rest, Senora. I can't. My mind won't stop. Maria poured her coffee without asking. You are afraid. Terrified. What if something goes wrong? What if Phantom panics with the crowd? What if Turner's men? What if the sun doesn't rise? Maria interrupted gently. What if the earth stops turning? You cannot control everything. You can only control yourself. That's not very comforting. No, but it is true. Maria returned to her dough. You have done something brave, Vivian. You have spoken truth when everyone wanted silence. You have stood up when everyone wanted you to sit down. Whatever happens tomorrow, you have already won. It doesn't feel like winning. That is because you are still in the middle of the fight. Victory only feels good after the battle is over. Vivian sipped her coffee, letting Maria's words settle. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, not quite dawn, but the promise of it. The day she'd been working toward for weeks was finally here. She found Caleb in the stable, checking Phantom's tack one more time. The stallion was calm, sensing the routine. "You ready?" Vivian asked. "As ready as I'll ever be. You?" No, but I'm doing it anyway." He smiled slightly. "That's becoming your specialty." By noon, Iron Mesa Ranch was transformed. Wagons and horses lined the road for half a mile. Families spread blankets on the hillside overlooking the demonstration corral. Newspaper reporters from Santa Fe set up with notebooks and cameras. The sheriff was there, looking uncomfortable. So were Turner's lawyers, their expressions hostile. And somewhere in that crowd of 300 people were Turner's allies, waiting for an opportunity. Ben had positioned ranch hands throughout the property, all armed and watching. Vivian wore her best riding clothes and a pistol hidden beneath her jacket. Caleb had his rifle slung across his back like it was part of his usual gear. They were as prepared as they could be. At 1 o'clock, Vivian stepped onto the raised platform they'd built for announcements. The crowd quieted, hundreds of eyes turning toward her. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice carrying across the space. "Today, you're going to witness something remarkable. 3 months ago, the stallion you'll see was considered untamable, dangerous, worthless except for breeding. 33 men tried to break him. 33 men failed." She paused, letting that sink in. Then Caleb Mercer arrived. Instead of using violence and force, he used patience, understanding. He treated Phantom like a living thing with feelings and fears, not an object to be dominated. And in doing so, he proved that there's another way. A better way. In the crowd, she saw some nodding. Others looked skeptical. Turner's lawyers were whispering among themselves. "I'm showing you this today because I want you to understand something. Change is possible. Healing is possible. But only if we're willing to approach things differently than we always have. Only if we're willing to admit that the old ways, the violent ways, don't actually work." She stepped down from the platform and nodded to Caleb. He entered the corral with Phantom following behind him like a shadow. The crowd gasped. This was already more than most had expected, to see the killer stallion following a human willingly. Caleb mounted smoothly, and Phantom stood steady. Then they began to move. What followed was 15 minutes of the most beautiful riding Vivian had ever seen. Caleb and Phantom moved together like they were one being, tight turns, smooth transitions, speed and power perfectly controlled. The stallion's black coat gleamed in the afternoon sun. His movements were poetry. The crowd was absolutely silent, transfixed. Caleb brought Phantom to the center of the corral and dismounted. The stallion lowered his head, allowing Caleb to rest his forehead against the horse's nose in a gesture of complete trust. The crowd erupted in applause. Vivian felt tears stream down her face. They'd done it. Proven the impossible. Shown everyone that... The rifle shot cracked across the valley like thunder. Caleb's body jerked and he went down, blood blooming across his left shoulder. Phantom reared, screaming. The crowd scattered in every direction, people screaming and running. Vivian was moving before conscious thought, vaulting the corral fence and running toward Caleb. He was on the ground, conscious but bleeding, his hand pressed against the wound. "Sniper," he gasped. "Hills to the east. Get down!" Another shot kicked up dust 3 feet from Vivian's head. She dropped, covering Caleb's body with her own. And then Phantom was there, positioning himself between them and the shooter, his massive body a shield. The stallion's ears were pinned flat, his eyes showing white, but he didn't run. He stayed, protecting the man who'd shown him gentleness. Ben and the ranch hands were firing toward the hills now, laying down suppressing fire. Vivian grabbed Caleb under his good arm and dragged him toward the corral fence, Phantom moving with them step by step. Behind the fence, Ben appeared. "I got him, ma'am. Get to cover." Like hell. Vivian pulled her pistol. "Where's the shooter?" "Eastern Ridge. I sent Miguel and Torres to flank. You need to..." Sissy. A third shot took out one of the fence posts. Vivian returned fire blindly toward the ridge, knowing she was too far for accuracy but needing to do something. Caleb was trying to stand, his face gray with pain and blood loss. "Vivian, listen to me. You need to get inside. This is an assassination attempt. I'm not leaving you. You're not helping me by being a target." He grabbed her arm with his good hand. Please, get inside, coordinate the defense. You can't protect anyone if you're dead. She wanted to argue, wanted to stay beside him and shoot at shadows until the threat was gone. But he was right. She was the one they wanted dead. As long as she was exposed, everyone around her was in danger. Ben, get him to the house. Maria knows field medicine. Get him stable. What about you? I'm getting my rifle and ending this. Vivian ran in a crouch toward the house, expecting a bullet to punch through her back at any second. She made it to the porch and grabbed her Winchester from inside the door. From this position, she had a clear view of the eastern ridge. She saw the glint of sunlight on metal, saw the shooter shifting position. Vivian raised her rifle, sighted carefully, and fired. The shot was clean. The metallic glint disappeared and a figure slumped forward into view. Even from this distance, Vivian recognized the build. Wade Turner. He'd escaped jail somehow, come to kill her himself. Miguel and Torres reached the ridge moments later. Torres fired twice more. Then silence. Slowly, carefully, people began emerging from cover. The crowd that had come for entertainment had witnessed an attempted murder instead. Newspaper reporters were scribbling frantically. The sheriff was already moving toward the ridge with 2 deputies. Vivian ran back to the house, her rifle still in hand. Inside, Maria had Caleb on the kitchen table, his shirt cut away, his shoulder a mess of blood and torn flesh. How bad? Vivian asked. Bullet went through, missed the bone and major vessels. He'll live, but he needs proper doctoring. Maria was already packing the wound with clean cloth. That was good shooting, by the way. The man who taught me said you hit the shooter center mass from 300 yards. Is he dead? Very. Vivian should have felt something, remorse, horror, satisfaction. Instead, she just felt numb. She'd killed a man. Shot Wade Turner dead on her own property in front of 300 witnesses. Self-defense, clearly, but still. Caleb's hand found hers, his grip weak but present. You saved my life. You saved mine first. Phantom saved both of us. Where is he? The horse? Ben put him in the stable. He's rattled, but okay. Vivian squeezed his hand carefully. You were right. This was an assassination. Turner must have bribed his way out of jail. Or his lawyers arranged it. Caleb's eyes were heavy with pain and blood loss. Either way, it's over now. You're safe. We're safe, both of us. Sheriff Dalton appeared in the doorway, his expression shaken. Mrs. Crowley, I need to take your statement. Wade Turner is dead. You killed him. Yes, I did, while he was shooting at me and everyone on my property. You'll find his rifle on the ridge and at least 3 spent casings. This was clearly self-defense. I know, Dalton removed his hat, looking older and more tired than Vivian had ever seen him. I'm sorry for all of it, for not protecting you from Garrett, for helping Turner cover up the murder, for everything. Your apology doesn't fix anything, Sheriff, but it's a start. The doctor arrived from town an hour later and took over Caleb's care. The bullet wound was serious, but not fatal. With proper rest and care, he'd recover fully. The scar would be permanent, a mark across his shoulder to match the one across his face. Another piece of survival written on his body. The crowd dispersed slowly, people processing what they'd witnessed. The newspaper reporters had their story now, and it wasn't the one Turner's lawyers had wanted. It was a story about a widow defending her property, about a violent man who'd escaped justice trying to kill the woman who'd exposed him, about a horse protecting the human who'd shown him kindness. It was a story that would spread across the whole territory. That night, with Caleb resting upstairs and guards posted around the property, Vivian walked out to the stable. Phantom was in his stall, still agitated from the day's violence. Hey, friend, she said softly. The stallion's ears pricked forward. He moved to the stall door, lowering his head to sniff her hand. You were so brave today. You saved Caleb. You saved me. She stroked his nose gently. Thank you. Phantom huffed softly, his dark eyes reflecting lamplight. He was still afraid. She could see it in every line of his body. But he was also here, choosing to accept comfort instead of isolation. Just like her. Just like Caleb. 3 broken things learning to trust again. Vivian stayed in the stable for a long time, talking to Phantom in the quiet darkness. Outside, Iron Mesa Ranch settled into an uneasy peace. The threat was over. Turner was dead. His co-conspirators would face trial without their ringleader. Justice hadn't been clean or simple or satisfying. It had been messy and violent and painful. But it was done. And Vivian was still standing. The investigation took 6 weeks. Sheriff Dalton worked methodically through Turner's escape, tracking the bribes paid to 2 jail guards and the conspiracy that had brought him to Iron Mesa with a rifle. The 5 men implicated in the original cover-up were arrested and charged. Their trials became the biggest news the territory had seen in decades. Vivian testified at each one, standing in courtrooms packed with spectators and telling the truth about her marriage, about the bruises she'd hidden, about the fear she'd lived with, about the night Garrett died and the 14 months of lies that followed. It was brutal. Defense lawyers tore into her character, suggested she was exaggerating or lying or seeking attention. They painted her as a manipulative woman using tragedy for personal gain. But the evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Harrison's medical records, Maria's testimony about injuries she'd witnessed, Ben's account of Garrett's violent temper, and Turner's own written confession, damning in its detail. 4 of the 5 men were convicted. The 5th, a ranch owner who'd been peripherally involved, received a suspended sentence in exchange for his cooperation. The territory watched it all unfold like a fever breaking. Some people clung to the old stories, insisting Vivian was a troublemaker who destroyed good men's reputations. But others began speaking up. Women who'd been silent about their own abuse started telling their stories. Men who'd witnessed violence and said nothing began admitting their complicity. The conversation Vivian had started couldn't be stopped anymore. Through it all, Caleb healed slowly at Iron Mesa Ranch. The shoulder wound left him with limited mobility for weeks, but he worked through the pain with the same patience he'd shown Phantom. By the time the trials concluded, he could use the arm again, though it would never be quite the same. "Another scar for the collection," he said one morning as Vivian changed his bandages. "Does it hurt?" "Only when I'm stupid enough to try lifting things I shouldn't." He watched her face as she worked, her fingers gentle on damaged skin. "You're getting good at this." "I've had practice. Maria's been teaching me." Vivian tied off the fresh bandage. "There. You'll live. Thanks to you. If you hadn't shot Turner when you did..." "Don't. We're not playing the what-if game." She sat back. "We both survived. That's what matters." "Vivian, I've been thinking about something." "That's dangerous." He smiled slightly. "I want to ask you to marry me, but I'm waiting." The words stopped her cold. "Waiting for what?" "For you to be sure this is what you want, not just what feels safe after everything that happened. For the trials to be over so nobody can claim you're marrying me to strengthen your legal position. For enough time to pass that we both know this is real and not just trauma bonding." He reached for her hand. "I want to marry you, Vivian Crowley, but I want you to choose it freely, without pressure or fear or desperation. So I'm waiting until you're ready." Vivian felt something crack open in her chest, the last wall she'd been holding on to crumbling. "What if I'm already sure?" "Then I'll still wait, because you deserve courtship and time and the knowledge that this decision isn't being made in the middle of chaos." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I've already decided to spend the rest of my life with you. Another few months won't change that." She kissed him then, soft and slow, tasting patience and promise. When they separated, she rested her forehead against his. "You're a remarkable man, Caleb Mercer." "I'm a broken man who got lucky enough to find someone equally broken who doesn't mind putting pieces back together." "We're not broken anymore. We're just scarred." "I can live with scarred." The trials ended in late autumn as the desert cooled and the first hints of winter touched the air. Vivian stood on the porch of Iron Mesa Ranch watching the sunset, thinking about everything that had changed in 6 months. Turner was dead. His co-conspirators were in prison or disgraced. Garrett's real story was public knowledge. And Vivian had somehow survived all of it. But survival wasn't enough anymore. She wanted to build something better. The idea had been forming for weeks, crystallizing through conversations with Caleb and the letters that still arrived from women across the territory. Women who needed help, who needed escape, who needed someone to tell them they weren't alone. She found Caleb in the stable with Phantom, the 2 of them moving through exercises that had become routine. The Stallion was magnificent now, confident and powerful, responding to the smallest cues. Several ranchers had already approached Vivian about breeding rights or purchasing offspring. Phantom had gone from worthless liability to the most valuable horse in the territory. I want to change what we do here, Vivian said without preamble. Caleb looked up, reading her expression. Change how? Iron Mesa is profitable. We're stable. But I keep thinking about all those letters, all those women who need help getting away from violent situations, all the people who've been broken by systems that don't protect them. She leaned against the stall door. What if we made this place a sanctuary? Keep running cattle and horses for income, but also provide safe space for people who need it. Women escaping abuse. Former soldiers dealing with trauma. Anyone who needs a second chance and doesn't have anywhere else to go. That's ambitious. It's necessary. I spent years trapped because I had no resources and nowhere to go. If Garrett had died differently, if I'd needed to escape instead of inheriting, I would have been lost. She met his eyes. I want to make sure other women don't face that they have options. Caleb was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he smiled. I think it's perfect. You'd need to expand the facilities, build proper housing, hire people with medical and counseling skills. It won't be cheap. I have money. Garrett left me everything, and the ranch is finally profitable. I can invest in this. She paused. But I need a partner. Someone who understands trauma and healing. Someone who knows how to work with broken things. Are you offering me a job or a proposal? Both. Neither. I don't know. Vivian laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. I'm asking if you want to build something together. Something that matters. I'm in. Whatever form it takes, I'm in. They started planning that night, sketching ideas on paper in Vivian's office. A separate building for housing, a communal dining hall. Workspace for people to learn trades. Corrals where Caleb could work with damaged horses using his methods, teaching others the same patient approach. Maria joined their planning sessions, offering practical insights about what people would actually need. Ben contributed construction knowledge. Even some of the ranch hands got involved, excited by the vision of Iron Mesa becoming something more than just a cattle operation. Word spread. The newspaper in Santa Fe ran a story about the widow Crowley's plans to create a sanctuary for abuse survivors and traumatized veterans. Some people called it foolish charity. Others called it radical and dangerous. But donations started arriving anyway. Small amounts from women who'd lived through similar situations. Larger sums from wealthy families who'd lost sons in the war and wanted to help veterans. Building materials from suppliers who gave discounts when they heard about the project. People wanted this to exist. They wanted to believe that healing was possible. Construction began in December. The first new building went up in a month. Simple but sturdy, with 8 rooms that could house families or individuals. Then a second building. Then a third. By spring, Iron Mesa Ranch had been transformed. The original house and operations remained, but now they were surrounded by new structures purpose-built for healing. The first residents arrived in April. A woman named Catherine with 2 young children, escaping a husband who'd put her in the hospital twice. A veteran named Thomas who hadn't slept without nightmares in 3 years. A teenage girl named Anna whose father's violence had destroyed her trust in everyone. Vivian and Caleb welcomed them personally, showing them to their rooms, explaining the simple rules. No violence, contribute what you can when you can, and respect others' healing processes. Catherine cried when she saw her room, clean and safe and hers. I can really stay here? You won't send me back? You can stay as long as you need, Vivian told her. Nobody here will make you do anything you don't want to do. You're safe now. I don't know how to be safe. None of us did when we arrived. You'll learn. Vivian squeezed her hand. I promise. Thomas was harder to reach. He barely spoke, flinching at sudden sounds and refusing to make eye contact. Caleb spent hours with him in silence, just existing in the same space the way he had with Phantom. After a week, Thomas finally spoke. Why are you helping me? Because someone should have helped me and didn't, Caleb said simply. Because you deserve better than nightmares and isolation. Because healing is possible if someone gives you space for it. I don't feel like I'll ever heal. I didn't either, but I was wrong. Healing doesn't mean forgetting or becoming who you were before. It means learning to carry the weight without it crushing you. Thomas cried then, deep, broken sobs that he'd probably been holding back for years. Caleb sat with him through it, offering presence without judgment. Anna attached herself to Maria, following the older woman through daily tasks and slowly beginning to talk. It took 3 weeks before she smiled, 2 months before she laughed. But she got there. They all got there eventually. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to keep moving forward. More residents arrived through the summer. Iron Mesa Ranch developed a rhythm. Cattle operations in the morning, communal meals at noon, various projects and healing work in the afternoon. Caleb ran horse training sessions, teaching his patient methods to anyone interested. Vivian managed the business side while also counseling new arrivals about legal options and resources. It was exhausting and rewarding, and nothing like what Vivian had imagined her life would become. It was also exactly right. One evening in late summer, Caleb found Vivian in the stable with Phantom. The stallion was older now, calmer, spending his days teaching younger horses and occasionally allowing carefully supervised rides. "He's getting gray around the muzzle," Caleb observed. "We all are." Vivian ran her hand down Phantom's neck. "But he's happy. That's what matters." "Are you happy?" She considered the question honestly. "I'm content, fulfilled, purposeful. I don't know if that's the same as happy, but it's close enough." "Close enough works." Caleb leaned against the stall. "I've been thinking about that proposal I mentioned." "Still waiting?" "Waiting's over. I've watched you build this place, watched you help dozens of people find safety and healing, watched you become someone even stronger than you were." He pulled a simple silver ring from his pocket. "So I'm asking now, properly. Vivian Crowley, will you marry me?" She looked at the ring, then at him, then at Phantom, standing peaceful in his stall. 3 broken things that had found each other and built something better than survival. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely yes." They were married in October, exactly 1 year after the demonstration that had nearly cost Caleb his life. The ceremony was held on Iron Mesa property, officiated by a traveling judge who'd heard about the sanctuary and wanted to support it. The guest list was unusual. Ranch hands and residents of the sanctuary, Maria and Ben in the front row. Dr. Harrison, who testified on Vivian's behalf. A few townspeople who'd stood by her through the trials. Catherine with her children. Thomas, who'd finally started sleeping through the night. Anna, who'd begun training as Caleb's apprentice in horsework. And Phantom, standing beside the makeshift altar like a witness. Vivian wore a simple dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. Caleb wore his best clothes, the scar on his shoulder visible above his collar. Neither of them tried to hide their damage anymore. The ceremony was brief. No religious language, just simple promises to stand together through whatever came next. To build a life based on honesty and patience and the belief that broken things could heal. When the judge pronounced them married, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers. Someone played harmonica, that same mournful melody Caleb had used to reach Phantom, transformed now into something celebratory. At the reception, Catherine approached Vivian with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for everything, for showing me that leaving was possible, that I could survive." "You did the surviving yourself. I just provided space for it. That space saved my life." Catherine hugged her tightly. "I'm going to do the same thing someday. Find a way to help other women, pay it forward." "I hope you do." As the sun set over Iron Mesa Ranch, Vivian stood with Caleb's arm around her waist, surveying everything they'd built. The original ranch buildings still stood solid and functional. The new structures housed people finding their way back to themselves. The corrals held horses learning trust. Cattle grazed in the distance, unaware of the human dramas playing out around them. "We did something good here," Caleb said quietly. "We did something necessary." "Is there a difference?" "Sometimes." Vivian leaned into him. "I keep thinking about who I was 2 years ago, how afraid I was, how convinced that I'd never be free. You were surviving the only way you knew how. But I wish I'd spoken up sooner, wish I'd found the courage to leave before Garrett died." She turned to face him. "How many years did I waste being afraid?" "None of them were wasted. You were learning what you needed to know to become this person." He gestured to the sanctuary around them. "If you'd left earlier, would you have built this? Would you understand the barriers that keep people trapped?" "Maybe not." "Then it wasn't wasted time, it was preparation." His hand cupped her face gently. "We can't change our pasts, Vivian. We can only use them to build better futures." Music drifted across the property. Someone had brought a fiddle, and dancing had broken out near the main house. Thomas was actually smiling, talking with one of the ranch hands. Anna was showing Catherine's kids how to braid horse manes. Maria was serving cake to anyone who passed by. It looked like community, like healing, like proof that people could survive terrible things and find joy on the other side. The months turned into years. Iron Mesa Ranch's reputation spread across the territory and beyond. People arrived broken and left with tools for managing their damage. Some stayed permanently, joining the staff or settling in the area. Others moved on to build lives elsewhere. The sanctuary never turned anyone away who genuinely needed help. Caleb's methods with horses became legendary. Ranchers from 3 territories sent their most difficult animals to Iron Mesa, knowing Caleb could reach them when violence failed. He trained apprentices, teaching his patient approach to a new generation. The harmonica he'd used with Phantom became a symbol, music as healing, gentleness as strength. People started calling him the Horse Whisperer, though Caleb hated the mysticism implied. "I don't whisper anything," he'd tell visitors. "I just listen. There's a difference." Vivian's work with abuse survivors drew attention from reformers and activists across the country. She testified before territorial legislatures about the need for legal protections and resources. She wrote articles for progressive newspapers about the systems that kept women trapped. She became a voice for people who'd had no voice. She was invited to speak at events in Santa Fe, in Denver, eventually as far as San Francisco. Always she told the same story, about silence and survival, about speaking truth despite consequences, about building something better than what you escaped. "The thing people don't understand about abuse," she told an audience of 200 women in Denver, "is that it doesn't just damage your body. It damages your belief that you deserve better, that you're worth protecting, that speaking up will matter." She paused, making eye contact with faces in the crowd. Iron Mesa Ranch exists to rebuild that belief, to prove that you are worth protecting, that your voice matters, that healing is possible even when it feels impossible. Standing ovation. Every time. But Vivian's favorite moments weren't the public victories. They were the small, private ones. Catherine getting her first job in town and coming back to Iron Mesa to share the news. Thomas adopting a dog and learning to sleep without nightmares. Anna completing her apprenticeship and starting her own horse training operation. Watching people discover they were stronger than their damage. 5 years after the shooting, Vivian and Caleb stood at Phantom's stall. The Stallion was old now, moving slowly, his black coat gone mostly gray. He'd been retired from all work except occasionally letting children sit on his back while Caleb led him in slow circles. The terror that had defined him was gone, replaced by a kind of peaceful acceptance. "He doesn't have much time left," Caleb said quietly. "Maybe a few months." "I know." Vivian stroked Phantom's nose. "He had a good life, though, better than what Garrett would have given him. He taught us everything we needed to know about healing, about patience, about the difference between breaking something and helping it find its own strength." Caleb's arm circled Vivian's waist. "I'll miss him." "Me too. But he gave us his gift. We're passing it on." Phantom died peacefully in his stall 3 months later, Caleb sitting with him through the night. They buried him on the ridge overlooking Iron Mesa Ranch, marking the grave with a simple stone. The inscription read, "Phantom, teacher, friend, proof that violence is never the only answer." People came from across the territory for the funeral. It seemed absurd, mourning a horse with the same ceremony reserved for important humans. But Phantom had been important. He'd been the foundation of everything Iron Mesa became. At the service, Caleb played his harmonica one last time for the Stallion who'd first heard it. The melody drifted across the desert, mournful and beautiful. When the last note faded, Anna spoke. "I came to Iron Mesa broken, convinced I'd never trust anyone again. But watching Caleb work with Phantom showed me something. It showed me that damaged things aren't worthless, that healing happens when someone sees your fear and responds with patience instead of force." She looked at Vivian and Caleb. "You saved my life. Phantom helped save it too. I'll carry that forward." That was the legacy. Not just one horse or one sanctuary, but an idea spreading like fire across dry grass. The idea that there was another way, that violence and force weren't the only tools available, that patience and understanding could accomplish what brutality never could. Letters continued arriving at Iron Mesa Ranch, from women who'd left abusive situations after hearing Vivian speak. From veterans who'd found Caleb's methods helped with their trauma. From people who'd opened their own sanctuaries modeled after Iron Mesa's example. The work spread, multiplied, became something bigger than Vivian and Caleb could have imagined. 10 years after Caleb first arrived at Iron Mesa Ranch, Vivian sat on the porch watching the sun set. She was 45 now, her hair threaded with silver, her hands weathered from years of ranch work. Caleb sat beside her, gray touching his temples, the scars on his face and shoulder faded but permanent. They'd built a life neither had expected, created something meaningful from their shared damage.
"Do you ever wish things had been different?" Vivian asked. "That you'd never lost your family? That I'd never married Garrett?"
Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "I used to. For years, all I wanted was to go back and change everything, save Sarah and Emma, be the husband and father they deserved." He took Vivian's hand. "But if I could go back and change things, I wouldn't be here, wouldn't have met you, wouldn't have helped build this." He gestured to the sanctuary spread out before them. "I can't wish away my family, but I also can't wish away what we've created from our survival." That's complicated. Life is complicated. Healing is complicated. Love is complicated. He squeezed her hand. But complicated is better than broken. As darkness fell over New Mexico territory, lights flickered on in the sanctuary buildings. Voices drifted across the property, people talking, laughing, existing together without fear. In the corrals, horses moved peacefully. Cattle settled for the night. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. And from somewhere in the distance came the soft sound of harmonica music. One of Caleb's students, practicing the patient melodies that had started everything. Vivian closed her eyes, listening, remembering the terrified woman she'd been, the widow paralyzed by fear and anger, the person who'd finally found courage to speak truth regardless of consequences. She thought about all the people who'd passed through Iron Mesa Ranch. All the lives changed, the cycles broken, the healing that had rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. This was the work that mattered, not revenge or justice or proving anyone wrong, just creating space for damaged things to become whole again. The legend of Iron Mesa Ranch spread across the frontier and beyond. People told stories about the widow who'd faced down an entire territory's corruption, about the war hero who'd healed a killer horse with music and patience, about the sanctuary where broken people learned to trust again. But the truth was simpler and more profound than any legend. Two people who'd survived the worst things imaginable had chosen to build something better than survival, had chosen to stand together instead of falling apart, had chosen patience over violence, understanding over force, healing over revenge. And in making those choices, they'd changed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. That was the real legacy. Not dramatic victories or public vindication, but the quiet, persistent work of turning pain into purpose, of using scars as roadmaps for helping others navigate their own darkness, of proving, day after day, that healing was possible even when it felt impossible. Vivian Crowley and Caleb Mercer lived the rest of their lives at Iron Mesa Ranch, growing old together while helping others grow strong. They never became perfect, never stopped carrying their damage, never pretended that healing erased the past. But they learned to carry their weight without being crushed by it, learned to build joy from materials salvaged from tragedy, learned that love, real love, wasn't about finding someone without scars, but about finding someone whose scars fit with yours. And every night, as the desert wind rolled across the land, people swore they could hear the distant sound of harmonica music echoing through the darkness, the sound of two wild souls who'd survived the fire and built something beautiful from the ashes. The sound of healing made audible, the sound of hope.